right now. Good morning and welcome to the May 10th edition of the Lane County Board of County Commissioners. Before we get into our full agenda this morning, I want to remind everyone that 2 weeks from today, we will be returning to live meetings in Harris Hall. That meeting in 2 weeks from today will begin at 8:30, an unusual time for us because we have a ceremonial that will take place at 8:30 on May 24th. And it will continue to be hybrid. It will be hybrid. So people who cannot make the meeting in person, whether it be for public comment or whether it be for presentation, can do it via hybrid. So with that, we'll move down the agenda to adjustments to the agenda. Mr. Mokrajewski, any adjustments to today's agenda?
We don't have any from staff.
Thank you. And to the board, I see no adjustments. Moving along to emergency business. Do we have emergency business this morning? Thank you. Then we'll move along to item number 3, public comments. Today we'll be taking public comments in the order that people signed up, and reminder to commentary providers that 2 weeks from now you'll have the option to be live in Harris Hall. If you wish to submit written testimony to be considered in today's in the public record for the board meeting of the day, it needs to be submitted 24 hours in advance. So with that, you'll have 3 minutes to testify. There'll be no warning. So at 3 minutes, the mic will be silent. So keep an eye on the screen. That gives you a timer. So Ms. Jones, I will turn over the cue to you. Do we have anyone signed up for public comment?
Thank you, Chair Farr. At this time, I do see that we have people signed up for public comment. For all of you who have joined our meeting for public comment, now would be the time to raise your virtual hand and you will be put in a queue, and I will call upon you in the order that your hands are raised. Just a quick reminder that if you press that button again, it will lower your hand. It is a toggle, so it raises and lowers. So please press it once and I will get to you. With that, our first presenter will be Deborah McGee, followed by David Eigel. Deborah, I will unmute your microphone and you may begin your public comment.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Deborah McGee. I live rurally, about 10 miles outside of Eugene, and Commissioner Buck represents me. I often think about what more we in the county can be doing to help confront the climate catastrophe. And I want to share something that occurred in Deschutes County recently that I'm excited about, and I apologize if you all already know about this. But the Deschutes County Commissioners unanimously approved a policy that finances clean energy improvements for developers and commercial property owners. The policy is called the Commercial Property Assessment Clean Energy, or CPACE. And Commissioner Burney, I believe we had conversations early on about your support for this kind of financing. And I think you can explain it far better than I can. I don't totally understand it, but basically CPACE allows for owners of multifamily housing to finance renewable energy, water conservation, energy efficiency, other sustainable features. Retail, office, hotels, healthcare, industrial, manufacturing, nonprofit, all of them can utilize this CPACE to finance sustainable features. It's been used across the country for student housing, multifamily housing, and low-income housing. So in Deschutes County now, owners of housing with 5 or more family units could finance solar panels, electric vehicle charging station, gray water systems, and other efficiency solutions. It means that we would have a much wider variety of environmentally conscious housing available. Renters and landlords share the savings on utilities from these conservation methods. And CPACE is an excellent option to achieve sustainability in a way that benefits business owners. The reading I did makes it clear that many partnerships and much cooperation helped make the opportunity for this financing possible. It allows for low-risk financing of clean energy improvements, and those improvements lead to reduced operating costs, increased property values, and more jobs. So at a time when we know that we need more sustainable living, reducing energy use is vital. So this kind of financing can help reduce energy and help achieve water conservation goals. I seriously hope you will look at what Deschutes County has done, and if it makes good sense, consider action likewise in Lane County. Thank you and have a great day.
Thank you for your public comment. Our next presenter will be David Eigel, followed by Micah McGomber. David, I will unmute your microphone and you may begin your public comment.
Good morning. This is David Eigel, and I just wanted to let you know the Oregon Black Pioneers exhibit has opened at the Lane County History Museum. And to say that it's incompetent and embarrassing to the point of the county is being defrauded of the money that's been given there is an understatement. I'll just give you a quick example or two here. First, when you go into the exhibit, there's a circular video that plays and plays and plays. Among the comments is that Blacks could not own property in Eugene, Oregon. Immediately to the left of that is an exhibit of Wiley Griffin and the home he bought and lived in the early 1900s. And they make very clear he was a Black man. There's a little problem here. What they're saying isn't true, and there'll be many more examples I can produce for you. There's much else that's just simply, again, misinformation. I can go on, but I'm not going to waste your time. Just to let you know that I'll be furnishing you very detailed information about this. But for one example, they're saying that the local papers were owned by and run by Klan members. This is the exact opposite of the truth. One of the leading opponents of the Klan was the controlling shareholder of the Eugene Guard and wrote articles and editorials criticizing them. I can go on and give you more information, but I'm going to do it in writing and not take your time here at the meeting. But I just want to give you a heads up, as it's really embarrassing what's happened here. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your public comment. Our next presenter is Micah McGomber, followed by Linda Martin. Micah, I will unmute your microphone and you may begin your public comment.
Thank you, commissioners, for taking the time today. My name is Michael McComber, local builder, Lane County, and I spoke last week as well about the F2 template dwelling changes that have taken effect. I listened to last week's board meeting entirely, both morning session and afternoon session. I believe when Amber Bell and Keir Miller presented their presentation, I believe some of the stuff, some of their interpretations, and some of the way they presented it, I don't feel was true. Jay Bozovich said that, hey, we need to bring the planners in and we need to weigh in. He said the commissioners need to weigh in on these code interpretations, on these ambiguous code interpretations. And it got shot down. 3 commissioners shot it down last week. The fact is that the template dwellings have been in place since 1993. For 29 years, it's been business as usual. F2 template dwellings have been restrictive, very restrictive on soil types, clustering houses, use of land, fire breaks, very restrictive, but still usable as intended in the code. We need to have the commissioners weigh in when someone at the planning department goes ahead and says, hey, we're going to change the way we interpret this. And we're going to now change the rules and affect all these landowners. We're going to devalue the landowner's property. We're going to take their landowner rights away from them. And no, it needs to go to the commissioners first. The commissioners need to clarify any ambiguous language in the code. And I think that point that Jay Bozovich brought to the board last week needs to be reinstated. One other thing, I'll try to make this short. Replacement dwellings on a habitable dwelling, you have to have, if someone has a manufactured dwelling and they remove the manufactured home and then they go down to get a replacement dwelling at the county and you're in F2, no, that's not going to work. They're going to say, no, you have to do a new F2 template dwelling, start from scratch. The same thing is true if your house burns down. You do not have your house burned down and go get a replacement dwelling. You therefore need to go get a new F2 template dwelling type 2 application you'll spend 9 months to a year and a half. You'll get contested by Land Watch Lane County. You'll spend tens of thousands of dollars, and you have to go to the LUBA to fight it. And I think the board needs to fix this right now. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your public comment. Our next presenter is Linda Martin, followed by Jim Belknap. Linda, I will unmute your microphone and you may begin your public comment.
Thank you. This is Linda Martin. I'm hoping that you guys can hear me. This is my first Zoom call. Oh, good. Thank you. My husband and I, Lenny and Linda Martin, we purchased our property in F2 back in 2015. Now, let me tell you, the man that we purchased from had passed the template dwelling. He had a well drilled on the property. He had power installed. A septic system is there, and his permit was approved, and it is excavated for a house to be built. We were not ready to, pursue this because we were still working. This was our dream retirement home. So in March, we went down to county to pull our permits to, continue what he had started. And we're informed that it is no longer a buildable parcel. This is 20 acres. People around us are living on 1 acre. And we had just finished planting 600 trees in the winter of 2020, and in the summer of 2021, every single one died because we're not up there to nurture them. We're not up there to stop the Scotch broom from taking over. And now our retirement dream home has been taken out of our future. The property is useless. Nobody notified us that, hey, you better act on this before you lose it. It just doesn't seem ethical or legal for this to happen to us. And I am sure that we are not the only people sitting in this position. So I'm very happy to follow Micah. And, we're not trying to destroy property. We were told that the peripheral big game map now took over our property. We're here to keep the trees alive and to keep them healthy. And we just want you to know this. We're not here to destroy it, and we're not here to ravage the animals. So I'm hoping that you guys take this serious. We sent an email back in the beginning of March to the County Board of Commissioners, and we were notified that it was partly our fail. And I'm sorry, but that pissed me off. Who failed here, really? I thank you for your time. Please take this serious. There are a lot of people in our boat. This is our life savings. And we wanted to have this home and take care of this 20 acres. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your public comment. Our next speaker is Jim Belknap, followed by Harry Sanger. Jim, I will unmute your microphone and you may begin your public comment.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Jim Belknap, Commissioners. My address is 77898 Chisholm Trail Drive in Cottage Grove. And I would like to address the current situation in the county that has generally been called the Nimkish decision. Some members of the staff will likely recognize that I worked with Mr. and Mrs. Gray Goodman, the owners of Nimkish. I've been involved in land use consulting matters for a bit over 30 years. The Nimkish ruling by the Land Use Board of Appeals was one of the most disturbing decisions I have seen in that time. The decision countered what has been the accepted practice of obtaining dwelling approval in Lane County in forest land zoned areas for nearly 40 years. It is no small task. The Goodmans are a retired couple and developed the property in question for the purposes of selling it to supplement their retirement income. They are not, by any stretch of the imagination, the classic real estate developer. More importantly this morning is I'd like to discuss a friend and client of mine named Geneva Davis. Mrs. Davis is an 82-year-old widow who lives in the Mosby Creek Valley. She and her late husband inherited a 43-acre parcel that Geneva's father had purchased in 1946 when he returned from World War II. Geneva's father always counseled her, save this property until you need the money, and then it will take care of you. About 15 years ago, I met with Geneva and identified what were likely 3 legal lots in the 43 acres. We also talked about what would be involved in obtaining the highest value for her inheritance, the development of 2 additional building sites on the property, while one of the parcels that would be qualified as a legal lot had a very modest house occupied by her granddaughter. At the time, Geneva stretched to come up with $1,500 for the application fee for the legal lot verification. I did the land use work on a handshake agreement that if at some time she sold a part of the property, she could pay me then. We were able to obtain a legal lot verification on 3 parcels within her tract. A few years later, Geneva approached me to seek assistance in obtaining a special use permit on the 28-acre portion of the property. Her husband was ill. She needed the money. I obtained a special use permit. She ultimately sold that property for $150,000. While a goodly sum and a small fortune to her, living expenses and care that she provides for her granddaughter have eaten away at that nest egg. Today, Geneva would like to sell the 11-acre parcel that is unimproved, but recognized as a legal lot. A neighbor has offered her $10,000 as reproduction timberland. As an approved building site, this parcel will sell in the area of $250,000, truly a fortune to someone living on Social Security. The property is classified as major big game habitat. Based on the NIMCISH decision, it cannot be approved for a dwelling. This is a solvable problem. It's within your power to bring about this solution. Bill Close has presented such a solution to you. I'm retiring, so this decision makes little difference to me personally, but to an 82-year-old widow in the Mosby Creek Valley, it deserves your attention. Thank you.
Thank you for your public comment. Our next speaker will be Harry Sanger, followed by Nicholas Anselmo. Mr. Sanger, I will unmute your microphone and you may begin your public comment.
Thank you. Hello, County Commissioners. Thank you for providing this forum today. I look forward to being able to speak to you in person as soon as the digital divide that has kept our community apart for too long passes here. Remember when you told us that COVID discrimination was over, that we should respect the choice of individuals to mask or not mask? Well, I've done my best to ignore the zombies walking alone outside with a mask on, even though that appears to be a mental health issue brought on by the pervasive propaganda pushed by Lane County, the state of Oregon, and your community partners. As the election nears, it has come to my attention that Lane County is still engaging in discrimination, likely in violation of national and international laws that require informed consent and not government coercion for personal medical decisions. Unless the form I have seen has been revised, Lane County Elections is requiring proof of vaccination for all election workers, even for temporary workers, without exemption, under the direction of County Administrator Steve Mokrzycki. Are you going to be using the digital vaccine passport that your constituents have been commenting against since November? Do you know the percentage of unvaccinated Republicans in Lane County opposed to unvaccinated Democrats? Are you unwittingly engaging in discrimination against the city of Eugene's protected class of political affiliation? Are you being authentic, or have you run the math, seen that 70% of the county's vaccinated under duress and coercion, and assume that your elevated positions of power put you above the constituents that you report to? I would laugh if this wasn't so pitiful. Of course you don't have time to address my concerns today. If past performance is any indicator of future behavior, one or more of you will use the podium today to lament the loss of women's rights by the leaked Supreme Court decisions. Even though this has nothing to do with our county, this trumped-up cause bolsters your partisan progressive agenda. You will likely fail to recognize the rights of the human soul that may or may not exist immediately after conception, but we can't even have that debate because the lines are already drawn. You will likely fail to condemn the leaker that violated the sanctity of our judicial branch, nor will you call out the violent protests just up I-5 or the agitators violating federal law by protesting outside the domiciles of conservative members of the judicial branch. I have asked before, can we please just speak to each other as humans? Can we please stop shoving partisan agendas through that ignore the rights of the minority opinion in Lane County? Yes, it's hard to maintain credibility for myself because the nature of this one-sided approach forces a one-sided reaction, and I have limited time as a single constituent granted in this public forum. But you have the forum. You should be able to show consistency and concern. If I was on your side of the screen, I'd be taking these land use concerns mentioned today quite seriously. If you truly believe in my body, my choice, then please extend that liberal attitude to coerced vaccinations. I'm personally willing to give your opinion some space if you agree to do the same. This is how this country is meant to function, not as a winner-takes-all monopoly, but as a delicate balance between the extremes, finding middle ground that doesn't make everyone 100% happy, but doesn't leave anyone 100% upset either. Thank you.
Thank you for your public comment. Our next speaker is Nicholas Anselmo, and Mr. Anselmo, you are the last speaker that I see. If anyone else did sign up and would like to present public comment that has not, please raise your hand now and I will call upon you after Mr. Anselmo. Mr. Anselmo, I will unmute your microphone and you may begin your public comment.
Good morning, fellow non-essential workers. I have good news. Since being fired for not wearing a mask, I found an essential job. I stay on my property and I charge people who come on my property who are vaccinated and or wearing masks a $50 fee. I talked to my tenants and was nice enough to allow them to have a non-recurrence $50 fee for being vaccinated every month instead of per on-site occurrence. I've also taken it upon myself to shame anybody who's wearing a mask for the greater good of the community, for them to understand to not spread fear and spread their germs and their possible diseases by touching their masks and touching products and things everywhere. It's for the greater good of the community to do this effort, very hard job of shaming, because a lot of times people don't give you credit for it because they take it very hard. They get really offended. They shy away. And some of them lash out in very violent ways. So it's a very hard job and it's a selfless job. These people need to realize how selfish they are, covering their faces and hiding themselves and separating themselves from the rest of the community in such a way. It used to be easier when the mandates were here, because then, most of all the vaccinated people would wear masks. So it was really easy to shame them and to, pick them out. So it's gotten a lot harder to shame people for being vaccinated. And because not all of them wear masks anymore. And it's just really fulfilling to finally be an essential worker. It fills my soul and it feels so good to help the community and help the greater good. So I just wanted to share that and my path going forward in this wonderful Lane County community that we've created. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your public comment. At this time, I do not see any additional hands raised, so that will conclude our public comments, and I will return the meeting to you, Chair Farr.
Ms. Jones, thank you for handling the queue once again. And at this point, Board of Commissioners, I'll open it up for Commissioners' response to public comments and or other issues and remonstrance. So I will be looking to the queue for hands raised. And as ever, if I don't see hands raised, you're going to be in danger of hearing from me. Commissioner Buck. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate everybody coming out and speaking today. We had a variety of items. I'll start with the first one. I'm really interested in the CPACE idea from Deschutes and learning more about that, and if we can do anything that assists businesses in that way. I think that would be incredibly valuable. There were several folks that were talking about the F2 land, and we had a good discussion about that at the last meeting. It also seems like there is a good deal of misinformation going on in the community about what we can and cannot do in our land planning department. And I'm hoping that in the future we can have our planning director clarify some of those things. In addition, clearly we know at the board level, as we spoke last week, that there's an issue for rebuilding in those zones should something happen to a building, and we take that very seriously and are looking for solutions in a variety of ways. And I will continue to work on that personally as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Buck. Further comments or remonstrances? Then I'll just add my own voice ever so slightly here. You know, when I hear people testifying about family legacy land that is no longer able to use it for the intended purpose, I wonder what causes that? You know, I mean, it's I'm embarrassed by the fact that we're struggling across the board to add housing, yet we seem to find ways that may be a little bit arbitrary sometimes to prevent housing from happening. So I joined Commissioner Buck in asking for how do we get to the bottom of this so that people can trust what they have been told their land can be used for, so they can replace their homes when necessary, and that we know that it's all happening in the most expeditious fashion. You know, when people are waiting that long for to start a home after their home's been destroyed by fire, as we've heard in testimony, then we just need to get to the bottom of it. I'm embarrassed when people ask me about it, quite frankly. Commissioner Bozovich.
Thank you, Chair. We all received an email from Pete Barrell with the Home Builders Association of Lane County, their executive vice president, that had attached to it a recommended way that the board could interpret the policy 11 of our goal 5 in our rural comprehensive plan, that the ambiguous language. And I believe it proposed a unique solution to this issue, at least on the NIMKIsh issues, not so much the fire rebuilds. And I will be asking the board later on under agenda team request and other business to authorize staff time to pursue that avenue. It's just a matter of the board adopting an interpretation and clarifying what seems to be the legislative history of our protections for big game habitat, which was clustering versus density. And I hope that I can get the board to join me in supporting the home builders recommendation.
Thank you, Commissioner Bozovich. Commissioner Burney.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to thank you everyone for commenting, and I'd like to respond to two of the bigger things I heard. One is we might be able to make something happen even quicker than what Commissioner Bozovich suggested. I have, for the public, the majority, if not the unanimous feeling of this Board of Commissioners was that it is unconscionable to not allow people to replace existing structures that have been damaged on F2 zone property. I mean, if you follow the trail of the discussion at the last meeting, that was the case. What I want to share with this board is only this morning, so forgive me. Normally I would give staff more time, but only this morning I forwarded to Mr. Mokrahysky and Mr. Miller an email trail from Senator Beyer and Senator Przansky and myself suggesting that the county's interpretation of that state law may be incorrect, that might be inconsistent with the intent. So before we may approve what Commissioner Bozovich might request here later, but before we spend any staff time on it, I would love it if we could nip this in the bud, because this is something that is just, it's just unconscionable, right? That people can't build a home on property that was zoned for that, whether it's replacing or their forever home. So, you know, or their dream home. So I'm hoping there might be an interpretation issue that can be resolved before we have to go through a whole bunch of rigmarole. Because every time we go through rigmarole, it just pushes people out further and further and further. So anyway, I just wanted to make that comment. I'd also like to respond to Ms. McGee's comment, Commissioner Buck's interest in what is called CPACE. C stands for commercial. So let me tell you what CPACE stands for. It stands for Commercial Property Assessed Clean Energy. I find so many times even people who use the term don't know what it means. As fate would have it, and I believe one of the commissioners here is trying to make this an issue, but I don't think they will. As fate would have it, I had the opportunity to consult, I don't know, 10, 12 years ago, after I had run for the Energy Trust of Oregon, the only program in the state before or since that provided solar on low-income housing across the state. After that, I was asked to consult a little with the county on developing a PACE program, Property Assessed Clean Energy, not commercial, It was then residential. And the county at that point, the board sort of majority shifted. People were no longer interested in that opportunity, and that's when Leanne Richards was the CAO, and it just got swept away. As a result of it getting swept away, the business that I later created, it created a model with the same group of consultants Lane County hired all that time ago, created a model for residential property assessed clean energy. That model was never taken up in Oregon. Good old Oregon, people couldn't figure out what to do with anything, it seemed like. But in California, it created $1 billion market for several years before other kinds of real estate things got in the way. At the time, my company, and it's hanging in my commissioner office if anyone wants to see it, created the largest CPACE project at that time in the United States. I have mentioned this as something that might be an option for the county time and time again, although Assessor Coles says that might cause problems, and I'm eager for our board to hear what issues or problems that might create. But it's not the answer. It's not the golden fruit. It's just one of 100 ways that we might create jobs, decrease carbon emissions, better weatherize buildings in Lane County. That's all it is. I'm delighted that Deschutes is doing it, and maybe we can follow suit. And thank you, Ms. McGee, for bringing it up. And I hope we've got a solution or a fix here, an interpretation, once staff has a chance to read what I forwarded them from Senators Beyer and Przansky. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner Burney. Moving down the list, I see no one else with a hand raised. So I have one last quick thing, and that is regarding why I sometimes wear a mask, which I do. A few weeks ago, I was diagnosed COVID positive, and with very little symptoms externally. And I was asked or told by my doctor to remain at home for 5 days and then wear a mask in public for 5 days. The reason I wore the mask in public for 5 days was to avoid spreading whatever contagion that I had to others. That's why people wear masks. They don't wear masks to protect themselves so much in this instance. Now, my father wore a mask all the time. My dad had emphysema. He smoked cigarettes all of his life and suffered from emphysema. And any dust particles in the air caused him great discomfort in the last years of his life. So he wore a mask in public. I bristle at the commentary that was made earlier regarding why people wear masks in public and the carte blanche assessment that it must be mental health issues. I bristle at that. So that being said, let's move on with the balance of the meeting. Commissioner Burney, your hand is raised. Is that just a ghost or?
No, it is my absolute support for your comment, Chair. It is time for us to be a little more accepting of differences. I believe your point, Chair, just reiterates this unacceptance of differences. We don't know why some people are wearing masks, and we don't know why some people aren't. The point is we should accept that. We should respect that. If some people aren't wearing masks and you're concerned for your health, you don't have to go right up next to them. And if some people are wearing masks, you certainly don't have to demean and judge them. Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to reiterate your point.
Thank you, Commissioner. Then with that, we will move along with the meeting. I'll remind Commissioners that we do have a 10 o'clock time certain today, which will be the regional wastewater budget, wastewater program budget, and we have a 10:30 time certain. So we'll move along to our consent calendar. Today we have a number of items on our consent calendar. All the items were placed on the consent calendar and will be passed as a single motion. Do I have a motion?
Chair, I'll move to pass the consent calendar for May 10th, 2022.
Thank you.
Second.
Moved by Vice Chair Trieger, seconded by Commissioner Burney, the consent calendar for May 10th, 2022. Discussion to the motion? I am seeing none. Then I'll call for the vote. All those in favor, please say aye. 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 Passes 5-0 unanimously. I received a message from Mr. Dingle that on item 6, County Council has no announcements today. So we'll move along, Mr. Mokrajewski, to County Administration. And item 7A is a discussion in the matter of determining a methodology for community grant making with American Rescue Plan Action Funds. And today we have Mr. Tyndall Ms. Dreyer, and others on the panel. Mr. Mokrahysky, I'll turn it over to you to introduce the panel.
Thank you, Chair. Robert Tintel, our American Rescue Plan Act manager, is going to lead the discussion. Robert.
Chair Farr, commissioners, thank you. Good to be with you today. Robert Tintel, American Rescue Plan manager. Recap for you today. In March 2022, the Board of County Commissioners allocated $9.9 million in American Rescue Plan Act funds. And this included $3 million for a community grant making process. So the board requested that staff return with a draft proposed methodology for allocating those funds. And the ARP team and the ARP steering committee, which is comprised of Lane County department directors, we prepared a proposed request for applications process for your consideration today. So staff seek feedback. We seek feedback on the overall proposed process for the RFA, request for applications, and our outlined purpose of the grant opportunity, our program focus areas for funding, and the composition of the scoring committee. As we present the sections of the proposed community grant-making process, if there are adjustments to our recommendation that we're discussing today, we'll have time at the end of the presentation for us to incorporate those changes based on feedback we hear today. So the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021 afforded Lane County with investments to assist in our response to the COVID-19 pandemic and recovering from its economic impacts. So within the ARP, the Coronavirus State and Local Fiscal Recovery Funds, it provided $74 million in direct allocation to Lane County. We received $37 million already in May of 2021, and we're expecting to receive the second half of our allocation, hopefully this month. We'll receive the remaining $37 million. To date, we have allocated over $110 million in American Rescue Plan Act funding by Lane County. And this includes our direct allocation, as I mentioned, of $74 million, ARP funds from the state of Oregon of $13 million, as well as funds for our rental assistance program and our water infrastructure grant. And in this section, the aid to nonprofits of $9.1 million, that includes the $3 million that the board allocated in our last session when we got together. Collectively in the region, we have over $159 million in ARPA funds that have come to the geographic area of Lane County. And there's a list of each city organization there and the funds that have been received. The process to best determine the use of ARPA funds, when we've gone out with our community survey and other outreach efforts, we received over 1,800 responses and incorporated feedback from the strategic planning process, as well as our direct inquiries. Multiple inquiries came from community-based nonprofits asking for an opportunity to use ARPA funds to address the needs that arose as a result of the pandemic. So the community grant-making process serves as an additional layer of community engagement around the use of ARPA funds and will have a significant impacts to help Lane County as we recover from the COVID-19 pandemic. Now I'll turn it over to Ms. Dreer, who will present the details of the community grant-making process and our request for applications and our feedback from commissioners after our brief presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Tintel, Chair, Commissioners. Staff proposed that eligible applicants for ARPA grant funds would be public and private nonprofit 501c3s. We request feedback on this eligibility. For example, should this be broadened to include public agencies or other entities? The proposed minimum award level is $10,000 and a proposed maximum award level is $500,000 with a limit of 1 award per organization. Applicants would not need to have a management qualifications packet on file with Lane County to apply. However, they will need to submit some information to Lane County prior to contract execution, which is required by this federal funding source. The request for applications document includes a purpose statement to inform potential applicants as to why the county is distributing grant monies and factors used in determining successful proposals. The proposed purpose of the community grant opportunity is to assist nonprofit entities to respond to the COVID-19 public health emergency and its negative economic impacts, assist nonprofit entities to provide services to individual members of the community who are negatively impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic, especially those individuals who are disproportionately impacted, as well as leverage existing public and private partnership and provide last mile or gap funding for projects that already have significant community investment. Staff seek commissioner feedback on these purpose qualities. The list of program focus areas or priority projects to fund reflects input from the community survey and commissioner priorities discussed in previous meetings related to the American Rescue Plan Act funding. Staff seek feedback from commissioners on these program focus areas. Proposed program focus areas include affordable housing, mental health services, especially for youth, projects that serve rural Lane County residents, and services for disproportionately impacted communities. Lane County's strategic plan includes a strategic equity lens. With that in mind, staff proposed prioritizing communities hardest hit by COVID-19 for ARPA-funded investments. Applications eligible for ARPA funding would be evaluated using different criteria, including an organizational commitment to equity. The ARP Steering Committee proposes a pre-screening process that includes equity as a pre-screening criteria. Staff proposed pre-screening applications to ensure that application materials are complete, the project meets ARPA and Treasury guidelines, so it's actually eligible for funding, and Lane County's priority to center projects on equity. Pre-screening would be conducted by Lane County staff, including the Lane County Equity Manager. Applications that meet pre-screening would move on to be scored by the scoring committee. This is a preview of what the pre-screening scoring criteria looks like. It can be found in your board packet. In order to proceed to the scoring committee, the proposals must obtain a score of at least 7 points when demonstrating their organization's commitment to equity and how their proposal responds to the public health emergency or its negative economic impacts. After the initial pre-screening just discussed, the scoring committee would evaluate each proposal based on the scoring matrix. This is a revised version of the ARP scoring matrix that was approved by the board to score internal Lane County projects. Scoring criteria include the following. Population served. This is in line with the county commissioner's goals to prioritize projects that serve populations disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. Geographic area served. Projects will receive more points for serving community members who live in rural areas of the county. The reasons for this are manifold. This was a demonstrable priority from the ARPA community survey, where demand for projects like water infrastructure and broadband were higher in rural areas. The cities of Eugene and Springfield also received their own direct ARP allocations, while smaller cities received minimal allocations from the state of Oregon's ARP allocation. Historic inequities such as reduced access to resources and investments make it more difficult for these areas to recover from the pandemic. Equitable outcomes, the equity lens, applicants will be asked to clarify their project outcomes and whether they were developed using a tool such as the equity lens. Applicants will be asked to clarify how their project aligns with the Lane County strategic plan. Timeline and milestones, in particular, were concerned with the logic of the project and whether funding can be expended by the project deadline of June 30th, 2024. As a reminder, ARPA funds must be obligated by December 2024, so a project end date of June 30th, 2024 will allow Lane County time to reallocate any unspent funds for other uses. Resources and partnerships, this is the collective impact lens. One of the purposes of this funding opportunity is to leverage existing public and private partnerships and provide gap funding or last mile funding. Applicants will be scored based on the percentage of the overall project that uses ARP funds and other funding or partnerships that are leveraged with ARPA funds. Applicants will be asked to submit a budget. And while not scored, applicants are asked about their ability to scale the project and impact if they only receive partial funding for their project. This question is not scored, but it's considered in case there are limited funds based on the number of proposals received. Applications that pass pre-screening would be forwarded to the scoring committee. Staff's initial proposal is to comprise the scoring committee of 2 county commissioners, 2 American Rescue Plan steering committee members, and 2 American Rescue Plan staff members. Grant applications will be summarized and categorized by tier based on potential funding status, similar to how internal Lane County projects were presented to the board for consideration. Final grant awards will be determined by the Board of Commissioners. Staff seek feedback on the composition of the scoring committee. In particular, consider if commissioners may have the availability to participate in the scoring committee given the proposal timeline, and considering that the final recommendations will go to the full board for review and approval. Additional staff or community members could be invited to serve on the committee as well as needed. Here is the project timeline we are looking at for the community grants request for applications, with a release next Monday. The applications will be posted on our ARPA website, lanecounty.org/ARPA, as well as the procurement and purchasing website. A press release and social media communication will be used to share the information, as well as targeted email outreach to organizations that provide direct services to underserved community and those who have previously inquired about ARPA funds. There will be a virtual info session for interested parties 1 week later on May 23rd. Applications will be due July 6th. Submissions will be pre-screened, and then the scoring committee will score, and proposed grant awards will be presented to the board in August. The proposed timeline includes presenting the results of the application scoring to the commissioners on August 9th, where commissioners will see a full list of all applications with their corresponding scores and the recommendations for funding. Prior to moving forward with this process, as previously approved by the board, we request your input on the proposed process. Changes or additional direction is requested. Specifically, staff seek feedback on the overall proposed process, the outlined purpose, eligible applicants, program focus, and composition of the scoring committee. And Chair, this ends our formal presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Trindle and Ms. Dreyer. And I will say, board, we do have 11 minutes until our 10 o'clock time certain, which is a hard time certain today. This is the MWMC. We have a lot of staff members from MWMC present for that. So we will be switching to our 10 o'clock time certain at 10 o'clock. So as we have our discussion, let's talk specifically, if we can, about the 4 requests that were made. We can begin, I'll look to the queue for discussion, but I'll remind everybody what those requests are. And in the queue, we have Commissioner Burney, then Vice Chair Krieger. The overall process, the outlined purpose of grant opportunity, the program focus area for funding, and composition of scoring committee. Now, a part of the feedback on the overall process is, shall we allow public entities to apply as well as private and public nonprofits? That should be a part of our discussion. So let's move along with the queue. Commissioner Burney. You are muted.
I said, thanks. I'll try and be brief. Although this subject, I think it would be nice to chat about it again. 1, what is a public 501c3? I don't think such a thing exists, but maybe I'm wrong.
We are, Commissioner Burney, we're looking really 501c3 status. So if a nonprofit has a 501c3 status, that's the determining factor we'll be looking at for.
It also means they're private, correct? Number 2, we have spent, I would have loved to have seen more dollars go into this. Commissioner Bozovich, I think we agree on that one. My personal opinion, no public entities. These should be private 501c3s. My only opinion, right? You wanted opinions on this, so I'm just giving you that. I see this as a mechanism to spread dollars outside of just public entities, and public entities are receiving what, 71 or 72 of the $75 million that Lane County is receiving from this allocation. Number three, while I know this is a well thought through process, which is typical of grant making, and there's nothing that really stands out here other than, it's a good, thorough process. I believe this is our opportunity to ask for creative, non-traditional ways of serving people. And that needs to be one of the priorities. I think so many times there are ways to leverage private and other community interests, and that's not, I don't see that here. I don't see here putting some of these innovative programs, innovative is something I would really key here, innovative programs in a fishbowl, which means that there ought to be a group looking at these programs and their implementation to see how that can impact future Lane County policy or future other government policy. So I think that this is a huge opportunity, Chair, to do much more than just give out $3 million. And I would love an opportunity to dig deeper with staff if any board members agree with my points. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner Burney. I'll say ever so quickly that Active Bethel Citizens, for instance, is a public entity which actually has a 501c3 associated with it. So I'm not sure exactly how that works. Commissioner, Vice Chair Trieger.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you so much to the staff for putting this together, really thorough and clear, and appreciate it, and getting the materials in time to review them in advance. On the topic of public entities, I think, as Chair Farr just pointed out, there are public entities that aren't local government, that aren't cities, because I believe what Commissioner Burney was referencing was cities had received their own direct ARP allocations, but there are other public entities that aren't cities. So my questions for staff, I have two. One is on slide number 2, where you list the total amounts that had been already allocated by different, housing, homelessness, aid to nonprofits, and so on, whether any of those allocations have gone to publicly funded institutions or entities already. So obviously, other than the ones we've allocated to our own services or departments, ones that have gone out to the community, nonprofits are nonprofits, but of those others, housing and homelessness services in particular, and infrastructure support, whether any of those have already gone to public. So this would be consistency to keep this 3 million pot available to the same audience, basically, is my point. And then my other question is just how the general public is to find out about this opportunity. If you've been keeping an interested parties list, how we're going to promote this grant opportunity.
Vice Chair Trigger, I will speak to the $110 million investments. Part of the $13 million that we received from the state of Oregon has been forwarded. Some funding has been provided to Homes for Good as well as the City of Eugene, which are public entities. Obviously, City of Eugene did get an allocation, but Homes for Good did not get a direct allocation. And so that is an example of a public agency that didn't receive direct funds through ARPA, but would be eligible if this proposal would be extended out to public agencies. As Ms. Drew mentioned in the presentation, we do plan on presenting a press release, working with Devin Ashbridge to get the information out. Similar to our community survey, we had great response from the media. And also we will be using social media. And we have an extensive list from interested parties as well, and nonprofits that will be direct emailing out this information. So we are hopeful that word will get out on this proposed grant making process.
Great, thank you for that. And I'm trying to hop back and forth between my screens. I was going to look back at the criteria in the packet. I guess just to finish up my response to whether to extend it beyond just 501c3 nonprofits to include public entities is it's a competitive process, and I would just want to look at the scoring criteria and make sure that it wasn't weighted in any way that would disproportionately benefit a larger public entity because of their infrastructure and kind of administrative support that they have. So I'm just going to look back at those materials while other commissioners are making comment. That would be my only concern, is whether we need to adjust the scoring criteria in any way to account for any inequities there.
Thank you, Vice Chair. We'll move along in the queue, but first I'll mention that I have been in contact with Matt Stouter, who's the Executive Director of MWMC. We're going to start that 10 o'clock time certain at 10 past 10, so we have a little bit more time than we had anticipated. So let's continue with the queue. And thank you, Vice Chair Trieger. Next, we have Commissioner Buck.
Thank you, Chair. One question, in the way that this is set up, is there any opportunity for special districts to apply? We all know that they did not get a direct allocation, and a lot have reached out, especially local fire authorities in rural communities. Do they have any chance of applying under this scenario?
Chair and Commissioner Buck, in the current proposal, special districts would not be eligible unless they had a 501c3 arm, which I do not anticipate most would.
That makes me a little sad because there are so many needs out there for our special districts. I would prefer them have some kind of opportunity to apply. They have pretty significant emergency management and recovery needs and projects that they could do that could be very viable and important for rural communities. And then I'm going to switch to the makeup of the committee. While it's my preference that it would be folks that are not necessarily on our board, if we do agree that we should have 2 commissioners on the board, I would recommend our chair and vice chair be those representatives. But I would prefer more public members. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Buck, for your input on that, and that's been noted. Commissioner Bozievich.
Thank you, Chair. First, I just want to say that Commissioner Buck stole one of my points, which was to add special districts and other public agencies that were not eligible for direct ARPA would be one of my desires to add to the eligible people to apply for grants. I first want to say I fully support the purposes that were described in the grant presentation and in the documents that came with the board materials, particularly like, the COVID impact. And I like the idea of gap closing and leveraging and serving those that were disproportionately affected. What I'm going to say is going to be controversial, and I hope it doesn't make us go past 10 after, but I'm not supportive of some of the work, some of the pre-qualification requirements under equity. The makeup of the board of an agency providing those services to those disproportionately impacted communities, it should be about the effectiveness of the proposal to serve them, not some artificial division of humanity into categories that only serves to cause prejudice by homogenizing that category group of people and assigning those attributes to individual people. We're just going a little bit too far with that and making that too big of a scoring factor in my belief with this proposal. I know I'm probably in a vast minority on the board on that, but I just wanted to state that publicly. Everything else about this I truly support, other than I would like to see special districts and other agencies that were not eligible for direct ARPA aid be eligible to apply for these grants. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Bozievich. That exhausts the queue. Mr. Mokrowski, you did have your hand raised and you lowered it. Are you still interested in adding right now?
I just was going to offer to Commissioner Buck and Commissioner Bozievich's comment about special districts or governmental public agencies that did not receive allocation. This is the feedback we're looking for from commissioners. So, if the board desires, if the majority of the board desires for us to include those groups, then we will do that. So I just wanted to provide that clarification that the reason we're here is to get feedback from commissioners on the direction you'd like to go.
Thank you, Mr. Mokrowski. Back to you, Commissioner Bernie.
Thank you, Chair, and really cognizant of the tension between the time frame we have to adhere to and the quality of discussion. I mean, the quality of discussion has made me change my mind. So I just want to share, I hear Commissioners Buck and Bozievich loud and clear, and I agree with them. on the special agency piece. Remember, I was saying, no, it has to be private 501c3. So I want to make that comment. I also want to make the comment that I think Commissioner Trieger brought up something that's really critical to me, and that is, who is going to hear about this? How are they going to hear? So in fact, everyone has the opportunity to apply. And then finally, and thank you, Chair, for allowing me the second round. Finally, I really think we need to stress innovative approaches. Yeah, within an application, how might their approach to problem A, B, or C provide some guidance and insight for future board policy? Thank you very much.
Good addition, Commissioner Burney. Vice Chair Trieger. You are.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to add 2 points. One, I wanted to appreciate staff letting folks know that they may be partially funded. As someone who comes from nonprofit land, I know how frustrating it is to put applications for grants not knowing if it's an all or nothing proposition. So thanks for flagging that at the outset for applicants. I know that's really going to help a lot of folks think about how they put their application together. As to the composition of the committee, I appreciate Commissioner Buck's suggestion that it be the chair and vice chair. I would be happy and honored and enjoy being part of the committee. I also do wonder if we wouldn't benefit if we keep it at 2 commissioners having a rural commissioner, or at least a non-Eugene. I mean, the chair and vice chair right now do represent Eugene, and particularly if we end up folding in the opportunity for things like special districts and so on. And my other point, which I'm going to forget, and then it's going to come back, I promise it is, but it's not. So I will probably, as soon as I mute, it'll come back into my head, but apologies.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Then I'm going to provide a little bit of a summary. And your last point, Vice Chair, was one that I would have made also, that while my district soon will not include North Eugene High School, but will include Franklin Grange, the chair and vice chair are pretty Eugene centric. So I would suggest it to commissioners, one being the vice chair and one being potentially a rural commissioner, either Commissioner Bozovich or Commissioner Buck. We can discuss that separately. The second thing is that regarding other agencies not eligible, I think it ended up being fairly loud and clear that other agencies that have not aren't eligible for ARPA funding independently, we should be able to make eligible, including special districts and or Homes for Good, for instance, which will be considered separately. So any disagreement with what I just said? Vice Chair Trieger, your hand is raised.
Thank you, Chair. I did remember the other thing. It was back to the composition. No disagreement with what you just stated. I heard, I forget, I think it was Commissioner Burney now suggest maybe more community member participation. And I wonder if there might be someone from the philanthropic community. I'm thinking of, some of our larger foundations or grant makers, whether someone who has experience with reviewing and scoring things like this would be a good option, because they by definition wouldn't be an applicant themselves. So we wouldn't have to worry about any kind of conflict of interest or prejudicial scoring on that. So that's just one thought, to add a seat for someone from the local philanthropic community or a local foundation to our committee if time and scheduling permits.
Excellent suggestion, because we have some wonderful people who are really very experienced at selecting grants, etc. Commissioner Burney.
Thank you, Chair. I'm looking at the time religiously. For me, the reason to do what Commissioner Trieger suggested was because I want to leverage their money and bring more of their money into Lane County. And if in fact we're doing innovative programming in addition to service, and if in fact we have foundation one or more at the table in a fishbowl, it even suggests we might be able to use this to leverage more and more and more resource for our community. Thank you.
Thank you. Then back to my summary. I think we're all in agreement regarding the application for grants. The composition of the board, did I hear maybe that we would add one person that would be from a philanthropic organization such as Shelter Care, etc. And that, I think, is the extent of it. Ms. Dreyer, Mr. Tyndall, did you hear anything different, or do you have everything that you need to move forward?
In summary, I hear interest in adding special districts and other public agencies who are not eligible for direct ARP allocations as eligible applicants. add innovative programs as a program focus area. And one make of the two commissioners on the scoring committee, one being rural representing, and adding a philanthropic community member to the scoring committee.
Thank you, Ms. Dreyer. Then the one thing we did miss is that Commissioner Bozovich had a point regarding the equity lens and the criteria that are listed. Is there any discussion that we need to have surrounding that, or are we satisfied as a board with the existing language there? Commissioner Buck, followed by Commissioner Burney.
I'll just add that I'm satisfied with the equity language that's currently in there.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Burney?
Commissioner Bozovich, was your point that had to do with the composition of boards that would be eligible, and that shouldn't be as important as the impact for people that are historically not represented? I just want a clarification. Thank you.
So yeah, my point is the scoring seemed to look mostly at the organizations and their makeup versus whether they're going to be effective at providing services to those underrepresented and disproportionately impacted by COVID communities. That to me is a higher need and scoring. As far as being equitable versus, some, determination at whether one organization's board has the correct representations on it. Yeah, that's basically what I was trying to get at it.
Thank you, Jay.
Excellent. Then Vice Chair Trieger, briefly, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mostly for the purpose of anyone watching that's not looking at the scoring criteria right now, this issue of equity and commitment, it's a continuum, and it's a point scoring that can be up to 5 out of a possible 5. So it doesn't leave out organizations that don't meet certain parameters around where they are in their work, recognizing the need for organizational commitments to equity. There's plenty of opportunity to get some number of points on the scoring matrix in that category, kind of wherever you are as an organization, plus other areas to get scored on. So I'm fine with it as written. I just, in the interest of time, am thinking for the sake of clarity and to wrap this item fully, that we make very clear who we want to have as the board representatives on the committee, so staff can move this forward, because I appreciate the short timeline that they're on to get the program up and running and that we're on to keep on our agenda this morning.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Then I would recommend this, that you be, the Vice Chair be one of the committee members, and that I would not be a committee member, and that the other one be one of our 2 rural commissioners. And I will suggest Commissioner Bozovich first. So is any disagreement with that? Yeah, go ahead, Joe.
Thank you. I actually don't want to make a hasty decision now. I'm sorry, Vice Chair. That's just my opinion, because we're rushing against time. It's now 9 after 10. There's no opportunity for discussion. Is it possible we push that decision to the thinking?
Then let's consider that decision toward the end of this meeting before we go into executive session today. Let's have a little bit more time to discuss that particular item. And with that, board, thank you for rushing through what really was a substantive discussion that we just had. And we will move forward with the next item on our agenda, understanding that we will come back to some of the elements of this particular discussion before we recess for executive session. So next we have our 10 o'clock time certain, which Mr. Stouder very gracefully allowed to move till 10:10. I actually talked to him on the phone while we were having the last discussion. And so it's Order 22-0510-01 in the matter of ratifying the fiscal year 2022-23 Regional Wastewater Program Budget and Capital Improvements Program as approved by the Metropolitan Wastewater Management Commission. And Ms. Mokrajewski, you have a panel today, and I am also the board's representative on the MWMC. The panel consists of the county of Matt Stouder, who is the Executive Officer General Manager of MWMC, Mr. McClendon, who is the Interim Water Division Director, and Catherine Bishop, who is the Springfield Environmental Services Manager. All names I'm really highly familiar with. Ms. Mokraski, I'll turn it over to you to introduce and conduct the panel. But I'll say this, that it has caused our 10:30 a.m. time certain to be pushed back a little bit. So we'll continue with this item until it is exhausted, probably around 10:40. Mr. Mokraski.
Thank you, Chair. And I'm just going to turn it over to Mr. Stouter to go through the discussion with you. Thanks.
All right. Thanks for the introduction, Chair Farr, and welcome, commissioners. We're pleased to be here this morning. So to talk to you about the MWMC Regional Wastewater Program and our budget. And I'm going to share my screen. We have a PowerPoint plan for you. Let's see here. Can folks see that? Excellent. I'll make everybody a little bigger on my screen so I can see people, and we'll get started. All right. So as in years past, we'll run through this budget with you, do a program overview, not spend a lot of time, but we do have ample time for questions that come up from the commissioners. So we'll discuss briefly a little bit about the MWMC's history and partnership, talk a little bit about our regional facilities, and then get into the budget. So this slide here we show every year, but it's an important one. Because it talks about kind of the history of how MWMC was formed and why it was formed and what we've been doing to date. Some of you may recall in the 50s and 60s and early 70s, there was quite a bit going on in the environmental arena, a lot of dramatic pollution going on in the country and in the nation's waterways. And the picture here on the right is actually the Cuyahoga River in Ohio on fire, which was lit on fire by a spark from a railroad that lit into the river. It was so polluted it burned, and this is not the first time it burned on many occasions. So in 1972, Congress passed probably the biggest piece of environmental legislation ever passed in the Clean Water Act. And after that time, in 1977, cities of Eugene, Springfield, and Lane County formed the Metropolitan Wastewater Management Commission. They did so because there was federal funding available at the time to treat wastewater on a regional basis. And we were able to capitalize on that. And in 1984, we brought our wastewater treatment facility online, and that was constructed using approximately 75% of the funding to build that facility was federal funding, which was pretty big. In 1989, we brought our biosolids management facility online. And then basically ever since, we've been working on projects to improve the water quality of the Willamette River system. I do want to point out that right now we are in, I guess what you would say, we were in negotiation with DEQ, but we're working with DEQ to receive a new permit, a reissued permit, and we expect to receive that permit in the next few months. We've actually seen a copy of it, and we're providing comments, working with DEQ, and we expect to have a public comment period in the next month or so, and then have that permit issued to us very shortly, which will kind of lay the framework for us moving ahead. I've showed this slide in the past as well, but just to remind folks, our commission is made up of 7 members. 3 of them are electeds from the governing bodies, and 4 of them are citizen members. Chair Farr is our BCC representative to the MWMC, and Vice President Bill Inge is also the other Lane County representative. We have a service area of approximately 250,000 community members, and you can see it here. It's essentially the urban growth boundaries for both cities. It does include a number of folks that live out in the Santa Clara area that are not annexed to the city of Eugene, but have wastewater service via hard pipe. And we provide service for mobile waste haulers outside of the urban growth boundaries in the county, and actually in some cases beyond the county. Our assets, we have our regional assets. We have the wastewater treatment facility, we have the biosolids management facility, and several other large assets. They're around $400 million of asset is what we own and operate. And as part of the partnership, Springfield is responsible for the administration, which is working with the commission, running the commission meetings, doing the permit administration, developing our capital projects and delivering those capital projects and delivering the budget. Eugene is responsible for operation and maintenance of all the facilities that we own, in our service area. With that, I'll let Mr. McClendon speak.
Hello, Commissioners. The Regional Wastewater Treatment Plant located at 410 River Avenue in Eugene operates 24/7, 365, and is designed with capacity to receive 277 million gallons per day. Depending on the season, the plant typically receives 20 to 30 million gallons per day, which is close to 11 billion gallons of wastewater per year. The facility is an advanced secondary treatment plant that satisfies 100% compliance with the Oregon DEQ discharge permit and has done so for the past 14 years consecutively. Primary, secondary, and tertiary treatment processes at the plant remove solids, oxygen demand, ammonia, and also provides disinfection prior to discharging the cleaned water into the Willamette River. Next slide. The biosolids management facility is located about 5 miles northwest of the treatment plant on Aubrey Lane near Highway 99, not far from Eugene Airport. Solids that can't be removed at the treatment plant are pumped out to the biosolids facility, where they are further processed into suitable use as soil amendment and fertilizer for approved agricultural application sites, primarily grass seed fields in the neighboring area. The Biocycle farm is adjacent to the biosolids facility and viewable from Highway 99. The farm is 600 acres of poplar trees as a location to apply recycled water in addition to processed biosolids as a soil amendment. Poplar trees provide much higher nitrogen uptake in pounds per acre than ryegrass. In recent years, the biosolids fertilizer is in high demand and consumed almost entirely by grass seed farmers, while the Biocycle farm is a safety net or backup location as an application site in case the agreements with private landowners fall through. As an agricultural crop, the poplar trees must be harvested every 12 years, which produces a variety of wood byproducts. For example, poplar lumber from the recent Biocycle farm harvest will soon be marketed through Bring Recycling in Glenwood.
The budget approval process. The MWMC budget and CIP ratification process included the adoption by the MWMC on April 8th. On May 2nd, it was ratified by the City of Springfield. On May 9th, ratified by the City of Eugene. And today, on May 10th, we're recommending approval of board order ratifying the MWMC budget. Our final adoption by the MWMC will be on June 10th.
So our work plan and budget are driven by our key outcomes and indicators. Those are contained in your budget document if you want further detail. I did want to note that each year the commission goes through these and makes small incremental changes to these. However, this past year, the commission requested that we take a little deeper dive on these performance indicators and tie them a little closer to the key outcomes to make them more meaningful. So we spent time at different commission meetings throughout the year and did just that. So updated indicators in your budget document, but these are what really drive our programs and our budget.
And looking at the adopted rate change and a 5-year comparison, for the MWMC budget effective July 1 will be a 3.5% user rate change. And that assumes that a residential customer with 5,000 gallons of wastewater treated. But we also know that our current average is about 4,000 gallons. And so if it's a 5,000 gallon, it would be an increase of 98 cents monthly. But for the customer who uses 4,000 gallons of wastewater, it would be an increase of 88 cents monthly. And this is a summary of the regional operating budget. It includes both Springfield and Eugene combined for the regional. And you can see on the summary line at the bottom, there's a 7.9% increase. In terms of the actual staffing has remained level at 97.12 FTE. Our personnel services are just 3.9%, but we do have a significant amount in materials and services at 11.3%, taking into consideration materials and services, a 63% increase in chemicals, and also increases in purchasing power for electrical power and natural gas. And this is showing kind of a 5-year trend looking back at the budget. And as you can see, the increase is a 7.2% increase for 2022-23.
Okay, a little bit about our capital plan. This slide shows our 5-year CIP, capital improvement plan. The cost of our CIP somewhat fluctuate year to year. We have large projects that span multiple years, so that's why some of the years you'll see higher numbers than others, as well as the fact that in the outer years, we expect those numbers to increase based on the fact that we're getting our new permit, and there's going to be some resulting projects that we're aware of that'll be impacting those numbers on the outer years. $35 million is proposed for our capital program this year. About 31 million of that is for plant performance, or just for what I'm calling plant performance improvements. It's really the hard systems at our plant, at our biosolids facility, and in our conveyance systems. We do have almost $4 million though budgeted for equipment replacement and other major rehab work. Our plant is almost 40 years old, and traditionally we've been focusing on newer requirements and newer facilities that are needed to meet new requirements, whereas now we're needing to also focus on aging infrastructure and rehabbing and/or replacing systems that are aging out. You'll see the projection is of a 5-year total of 105 million, and we'll talk a little bit about a few projects here in the last couple of slides. One completed project I wanted to plug before we moved into planned projects is the Renewable Natural Gas Upgrade Facilities Project. You may have heard about this. We completed this past year in partnership with Northwest Natural Gas. We're beneficially reusing 100% of the biogas that's generated through our anaerobic digestion process. That gas was flared into the atmosphere previously. About 40% of it was flared. We were using the rest of it to power our facility, but now we're capturing all of that gas and we're putting it back into the pipeline. That's going to eliminate flaring of methane gas into the atmosphere. It's also going to provide us with an additional source of revenue to help us in offsetting some of the rate increases we'll be looking at in the future. And that revenue is going to come to us in the form of environmental attributes, environmental credits that are associated with the gas, as well as the physical sale of the brown gas to Northwest Natural. We started injecting into the grid in 2021. This project, I'm kind of shooting from the hip here. I'm thinking it was around 20 million. Don't quote me on that. But we expect our project payback to be between 7 to 9 years with the amount of revenue that we're going to be generating. And then after that, it's going to be a stable source of income for us moving forward. There's several projects that are planned in the upcoming fiscal year, and we do have a couple here shown on this page. The first one is improvements to our aeration basins. This is a secondary treatment process for us, and we are looking to make energy efficiency improvements out here, as well as increase our dry weather treatment capacity in this system. And then our administration building here, it's a building that's 40 years old. It is in need of being upgraded, and we are looking at options with the commission right now to do some rebuilding of this facility. There's a couple options we're evaluating. This building is where we house operators and some of the plant staff, as well as it's the brains of, you can think of it as the brains of the wastewater treatment facility. It's where our operations console is located. And it's the most critical piece of infrastructure that we have with respect to what was identified in our disaster mitigation and recovery planning effort that focused on resiliency and what would happen in a Cascadia subduction zone earthquake. So this is a priority CIP project for us. With that, that's what we had planned for you as far as presentations. We are available for any questions that you might have. And we do request that you approve the board order to ratify the regional program budget and CIP.
Thank you, Mr. Stouter and Ms. Bishop, for your presentation today. This is just ridiculously fascinating to me. I've told you that many, many times. On Mr. McLennan also, I'm sorry. You know, years ago, when the plant was only 12 years old, you say it's 40 years old now, when the plant was 12 years old, Peter Ruff here gave me a tour of that plant. He's now on the board. And at that point in time, I thought this is one of the biggest things that government does here locally, is make sure that when you discharge waste through the sewers, it's taken care of, and in admirable fashion. At this point, Mr. Stouter, I have a couple more things to say, but I'll turn it over to the queue, which I don't see any. Until I see hands raised, I'm going to say a couple more things. The first is regarding renewable natural gas. The coordination that took place in bringing this project to fruition is really remarkable. The work of the staff in conjunction with contractors, in conjunction with planners, and in conjunction with the Northwest Natural Gas, it really gives us an example, a precedent that is set by MWMC that can be repeated not just in our region but elsewhere. And Matt, you know, you talked a little bit about that. The side effect is that it is it's a cost-effective way. Let's say it's called a stable source of income, is your quote on that. And it is a stable source of income which will pay for the project within 7 years or so. But beyond that, it really is a precedent that has been set. We're no longer flaring gas, we're returning renewable natural gas into the system. And the hands are beginning to raise. Commissioner Burney.
Oh, at least one. First, Matt and Catherine and James, I just want to say, the first time I toured your facility, you might not have been there, might not remember, was when I brought a group of elected and administrative leaders from Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador to tour it, as they were looking at various ways they could organize their economy in terms of various clean energy and clean water ventures. I was so impressed with that. So I just want to take this opportunity to tell you I'm equally impressed with the management of the facility. I think I agree with Commissioner Farr. In fact, he will tell you, I tried to arm wrestle him to be the board liaison to this, but he's stronger than me and he always wins. But you know, I will absolutely support this. It's an absolute, I think you have a gem of a facility that impacts our community in so many ways. I would like to ask one question though, and that question is, if Lane County can ever get sewer and water to Short Mountain and take the leachate trucks off the roads and hook that into, at Springfield, MWMC, do you have the capacity to deal with that? I think I know the answer, but I would just like to hear it. Thank you.
Do we have capacity for Short Mountain?
Yes.
Yes, we've done that analysis, and actually the county's done that analysis. But as you're probably aware, Commissioner, right now it's trucked into Goshen, and so there's adequate capacity. We're already receiving it.
You're already receiving it. Yeah, one way or the other. So anyway, kudos to all the work that you do, and I'm done. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Burney. I see no further hands raised. I'll mention that's the first time I've ever heard that particular issue talked about the pipeline, as opposed to truck after truck after truck after truck after truck driving up the freeway. Never heard that before.
I would imagine it's a net zero to you guys, right? I mean, you're already handling the waste, or is that not correct?
Essentially, yes. It would be entering the system at a different place, and so it would be traveling through a few more miles of pipeline. But essentially, as far as the treatment of that waste, it's going to be the same.
Thank you.
Perfect. We do have hands. Commissioner Bozovich, followed by Vice Chair Krieger.
Thank you, Chair. I think Matt and his staff would probably agree that it would probably be better to have a direct pipeline rather than getting dumped in batches. As you're running a treatment process, a steady flow is always easier to treat rather than having concentrated batches of certain constituents hit the plant. Yeah, kind of messes with some of the processes. I do kind of envy the chair serving on this board because I've served on it before. And, speaking of Pete, I worked with him when I developed 2 pump stations for various subdivisions out in Springfield for Hayden Gardens and River Glen. in my prior life as a civil engineer. so I kind of miss having that connection to that engineering aspect. But I'll just say once again, great work. Both your budget and your CIP are well thought out, and you guys are doing an excellent job with your fiscal management to keep your rate increases relatively low for the customers while still staying on top of your deferred maintenance and capital needs, which is such a critical thing to not fall behind as a major piece of infrastructure for this community of Lane County. So thank you for your great work, and I'll be supporting the motion when it's made.
Thank you, Commissioner Bozovich. Vice Chair Trieger.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be brief. I also just wanted to extend my appreciation. This is my first time as Commissioner getting this presentation. It was very clear and easy to follow, and I really appreciate it. And I just want to say, this is a perfect example of really how so much of what we do at the county, so much of our good work is really invisible. And this is a really important presentation to make that work visible to anyone from the public who might be watching, right? It's really easy to see the problems, but when we're avoiding problems or providing solutions, those aren't always as evident. So this is a great way to sort of show our work. And I will also just say how while this falls outside of the scope of public health, this actually is very much public health work in action, providing wastewater treatment. And one only has to look to failures of wastewater treatment systems to understand the implications of what happens when they're not in place. So thank you for your work. Thank you for the clear presentation and for protecting the community.
Thank you, Vice Chair Trieger. Commissioner Buck.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm out here sitting with a septic tank in a drain field. And so if you just multiply that by the amount of people within the metro center that you're serving, you can just see how much more efficient that your service provides. But you know, out here we don't feel it until we have a backup, and they're pretty serious backups if your septic fails. So it is invisible what you do. People probably don't even think about it every time they flush their toilet, unless you probably work there, or you're folks like us that get to review your budget every year. I'm very supportive. I thank you for what you do, and just want to note that it is a complicated endeavor that you manage each and every day, and I appreciate all your hard work. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Buck. And just one last thing that I will say is that if you Google Metropolitan Wastewater Management Commission, MWMC, you'll get to our website, which is called NWMC Partners. And Mr. Starra, Matt, it is a partnership. What you had is a partnership that is unsurpassed in any partnerships that I know. So congratulations on the work you do. There are 3 elected officials, one from Lane County, one from City of Eugene, one from the City of Springfield, and 3 at-large members, one from each of those 3 entities. Well, I'll acknowledge the at-large members right now. It's Peter Ruffier, who we've already spoken about, who used to be the plant manager, Walt Meyer from Eugene, and Doug Keeler from Springfield. Mr. Stouter, anything you'd like to add before we move along?
Just one more. You got it.
Commissioner Burney.
I was just going to ask, Chair, if a motion is in order at this point.
It is, in fact. Thank you.
Well, I would like, despite my envy of the chair for sitting on this body, I would like to move approval of Order 22-05-10-01 in the matter of ratifying the fiscal year 2022-23 Regional Wastewater Program budget and Capital Improvements Program as approved by the Metropolitan Wastewater Management Commission.
Second.
Moved by Commissioner Burney, seconded by Commissioner Bozovich. That is Order 22-05-10-01, and we'll entertain discussion to the motion. I'll state this before we do that, Commissioner, that you also sit on a board that I envy, so maybe we should talk. So we have a motion. Any discussion to the motion?
I thought we already agreed we would talk. Thank you.
We have. Mr. Stouter, anything before we cast the vote?
No, just really appreciate the opportunity to be here and always enjoy presenting to the board. So thank you very much.
Well, we'll be back in person, I believe, at our next meeting, and I'm looking forward to that. Then now we'll call for the vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Passes. Any opposed? None. Passes 5-0 unanimously. Thank you very much, Mr. Stouter, Ms. Bishop, and Ms. McLennan for joining us today. And I look forward to seeing you on June 10th in person with a nice light breakfast, as you always provide. Thank you. Then Mr. Mokrahewski will move along to item C, 7C, which is an order and resolution 22-05-10-02 in the matter of authorizing financing of full faith and credit bonds and related matters. You have a panel which will consist of Mr. Tyndall, Ms. Moody, and others, and I'll ask you to introduce the panel, and also thank you for delaying the start of this particular time certain item. Thank you very much. Mr. Mokrahewski.
Thank you, Chair. We were, and no worries with the late start. We're staying relatively on track with the timing today, so appreciate that. We were before you, I think it was a couple weeks ago, on this item, and I think what you're going to hear, and I met with Mr. Tyndall and Ms. Moody yesterday, what you're going to hear from us is we still, while interest rates continue to rise, and I think we're now above the 4.5% rate that we had sort of set as a cutoff. You'll hear about action that the Lane Community College recently took on a similar issuance. Our folks feel like there's still potential here, and there's value in continuing to explore this as one of very few tools that we have available to us to manage our PERS expenses. But we also understand that there's both the financial analysis, the uncertainty in the market, both in the market and with interest rates. And then there's this public and political process that we go through where we tend to act, and as we should, with an abundance of caution, given the taxpayer resources that we are responsible for stewarding. So I think the bottom line where we've sort of resolved is we think there's still value in considering this moving forward, but additional analysis and observing where the market moves in the next few weeks and months may be the right path. So I just wanted to sort of offer that we're open to the board's sentiments on this issue. If you have a strong feeling one way or the other, we still do feel like while interest rates are rising, they're still at a place that they're lower than they have been in the past for these types of transactions. But we understand the desire for risk mitigation and certainty on these types of decisions. So we'll welcome an open discussion here. And I think generally speaking, we want to continue to consider this tool moving forward as a potential option for us over the next few weeks and months. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Tyndall, who is our ARPA manager, but also has been involved as our former finance manager. And we are getting closer to selecting a new finance manager, but Robert is assisting us in this work along with Christine Moody, our budget manager, and Carol Samuels from Piper Sandler, our financial advisor. So I'll turn it over to Robert.
Thank you, Mr. Mokrahewski. Chair Farr, commissioners, thank you for having the opportunity to come again today. I'm here on behalf representing the county treasurer function, and continued ARPA manager as well. Just a quick recap. This item was presented to the Finance and Audit Committee on March 17th, and the committee recommended this be brought forward to the full board for review. And we last met on April 5th, and at that time, the board directed us to submit the necessary paperwork to PERS to continue the process moving forward on the bond analysis. And on that same day, April 5th, the county did request the necessary actuarial analysis from PERS for a potential lump sum deposit to create a new site account. And we submitted payment to Milliman, the company that performs the actuarial analysis on behalf of PERS, and then they will give those results to PERS, who in turn give it back to us. So we're moving forward in the process, but since then, we know, as Mr. Mokrahewski mentioned, and as Ms. Samuels will give us a presentation of the current market, we do know interest rates are continuing to increase and there's uncertainty in the market. a pension obligation bond is still a very viable consideration for addressing our increasing pension costs. It's a great tool that we have, and we still have confidence in this process as a way to manage those costs. However, given recent market trends that we'll hear a little bit more about, we do want to do some additional analysis on this because, again, rates remain at historically low levels, even though they are still rising. And again, we can benefit from the pension bond. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ms. Samuels. She's going to give a quick presentation, and then we'll come back for discussion and talk about next steps for us as well and additional analysis.
Thanks, Robert. Can everyone hear me?
Affirmative.
I am going to share my screen. And can someone give me a thumbs up that they can see it?
We see your screen with the side slides on the side also, not the full screen.
All right, let's try and fix that. Okay, how about now?
We still see it's not full screen. But we do see the main slide.
Right, hold on. Let me try again. Okay, how about now?
Perfect. Thank you, Ms. Samuels.
Fantastic. All right. So this will be very abbreviated based on the fact that we went through a much more thorough presentation at your last meeting on this subject. But let's just drill down to what's been going on in my world over the course of the past month or so. This is a graph that you've seen before. It's a historic look back, so all the way back to 1996, and it's looking at taxable treasury rates, which are the benchmark against which your pension bonds would be priced. And you can see, if you look at the tail end here, or look at the 1-year inset box, that rates have been doing nothing but one thing, which is going up. However, from a historical perspective, if you look at the overall context, we are still at relatively low levels. Reminder that the last time you issued pension bonds was back in 2002 when you were basically up here. More dramatically, this is what has been going on in the world of treasury rates for the 10-year specifically, because that tends to be the benchmark. We could also look at the 30-year and the trajectory would be virtually identical. But from January 1st, when we really started to talk about this, interest rates have essentially gone up over 1.5%. So that puts us in a position where, rather than the 450, which when we first started to talk about this was a healthy cushion above where the market was, as of yesterday we were estimating an all-in interest rate, the TIC or true interest cost, of 4.85. Market is a little better today. Maybe we shave 5 basis points off of it, but you can see that that's a fair amount above the 450 that you have in your resolution document. One other note, I'm sure you're tracking this as well. The stock market has not been doing particularly well. In fact, if you track the S&P 500, it's down about 12% year to date. The latest returns we have from PERS, they are very delayed, is through March 31st. And at that time, year to date, we were at break even. That's way better than the rest of the market has been doing. But of course, we don't know how they did in April. So where does that put you? Well, if we were to follow the existing schedule, which you can continue to follow with basically no consequence until May 23rd. So let's talk about the steps that theoretically you could pursue. You could go ahead and adopt the resolution with a 450 max. And if we got to the sale date and interest rates were at 485, you just would not proceed. In fact, if rates were at 451, you would not proceed without coming back to you and getting additional authorization. So that's an option. One of the things that Robert mentioned is, as an ingredient into your resolution, is this public report, which includes the Echo Northwest analysis that was prepared in January. You may remember was the one that gave you that graph with the probability of a positive present value or the probability of success. That was at 3 different interest rates, 2.5, 3.5, and 4.5. One option would be to go back to Echo Northwest and ask them to update that report for changes in the market, and potentially to ask them to analyze if, say, you went to a maximum TIC of 5%, what their expectation, the probability of success would be at that level. That's an option. We are on track to receive the analysis that Robert cited earlier from PERS, that you have paid roughly $1,500, if I remember correctly, to PERS to have Milliman prepare the payoff calculation. If you decide today that you would prefer to take a pause and get additional analysis, it may be possible. I don't know. It's possible they've already done the work, but it may be possible to get in touch with PERS and ask them to put this analysis on hold so that you don't have to redo the whole thing with an additional, although nominal, expense in a month or two after additional analysis is provided. So that's an option. May 23rd is kind of a key date where the rubber really hits the road of, do you want to continue on this schedule or not? That's because that's the day we have scheduled to talk to the rating agencies. And the rating agencies, unlike most other service providers, including Piper and your bond attorney, do not charge unless a bond sale is successfully closed. The rating agencies are unwilling to play by those rules. They want to get paid for the analysis they do. And I will note that we had a conversation with Standard & Poor's where they indicated that this market is so crazy and people are dropping like flies that maybe they'd be flexible, but we haven't heard definitively. So our recommendation is, if you go to the rating agencies, you have to be pretty committed to wanting to move ahead, because you may get a bill. And in your case, the bill could be substantial. For 2 ratings, we're estimating approximately $110,000 to $120,000 per rating. So that's roughly a $250,000 cost that they will give you some grace period, but if the deal never happens, you may be on the hook for a substantial payment. So again, our current schedule is we are due to have conversations with the rating analysts on May 23rd. it is not that conversation that triggers the fee, rather it's when they take their notes from our conversation and go to a committee. So we may have a couple of days more, but that's coming up obviously really quickly, which is why we wanted to solicit your feedback about your preferred approach. If everything went perfectly and interest rate went back down to 4.49, say, we are planning a bond sale on June 13th, which would allow the closing to happen on June 28th and payroll rates to be reduced as of July 1st. So I'm going to pause there and turn it back to all of you. You ask questions, open the conversation, etc. And Robert, obviously, if you have other things you want to add, I'm going to mute myself now.
Thank you, Ms. Sam, but keep your finger handy on that mute button. Mr. Tyndall, I'll call on you really quickly. Just a reminder to the board that our next scheduled board meeting, regular board meeting, is the day after the rubber meets the road date. So as we move forward, Mr. Tyndall, anything you would like to add, or Mr. Mokrahajski?
Chair Farr, thank you. Just to reiterate, a couple options the board has before you today. There is a proposed board order in the packet. It has that rate at 4.5% as a max for us to continue to go forward. Again, at this point, it doesn't look like we would be moving forward at a rate of 4.5%. It's unlikely. We could take a pause and do other analysis before we come back with another board order about moving forward. You could adjust that rate to a max at whatever the board feels comfortable with, 5% or whatever number. That's just an option. As a reminder, Mr. Mokrahajski referred to it, or point of reference, another LCC board grappled with this same conversation. Last week, they ended up approving moving forward at a rate of 4.51%. But under that scenario, given the market now, they'll be at the same place where their financial staff will have to come back and return to the board, because it's unlikely by the time they get to a bond sale, they'll be able to proceed with that, with their max rate. So other governments are grappling with this same conversation. So I just wanted to let you know about that. So, but we do also have the option of pausing at this moment and then seeking additional analysis based on additional interest rates, and then coming back to the board at another time.
Thank you, Mr. Tyndall. And once again, Ms. Samuels, seems that things have been pretty volatile. Maybe we didn't foresee this kind of volatility, which leads me to think what kind of volatility is ahead that we don't see at this point in time. Our interest rate is going to go further up. Is the C going to change continually? So we'll go ahead with the discussion. Commissioner Buck.
Thank you, Chair. Just to clarify, in some of your slides, you noted that when we did this previously, the interest rate was actually higher, a couple points higher, really. And it was successful over time. It still worked. So I'm not as concerned about that. And I've been talking with other folks that are looking at bond, anything under 5% seems to still be pretty darn good. I think what this comes down to really is, what will the market do in that first 5 or 10 years after we sell? That really is what will make or break this particular bond at the county, and how you have that silver ball and know what's going to happen. I mean, nobody has that, and nobody can predict that. We have as much, economic data that these folks provide for us on our behalf to kind of help assist us to analyze that the best they can. But I think that's really the crux of what's going to determine for me, are we going to move forward or should we shelve it for now? For me, it's not the interest rate. It's about what are we getting in information to let us know what's going to happen in the marketplace in the first 5 or 10 years afterwards.
Thank you, Commissioner Buck. I'll watch the queue to see if you want to speak more. Mr. Mokrahajski.
Well, just to that point, I think, Commissioner Buck's point is spot on. This is the challenge, I think, for the board and for all of us is you're having to make a decision in the short term, right? In a pretty volatile environment where interest rates are climbing and the stock market is declining. But really we're looking over a 20-year period of time. And so the question, I think, for the board here is, and for all of us, is do we feel confident enough that the market will outperform over a 20-year period of time, will outperform the interest rate that we'll get when we put this out for bid. So that's sort of the question here. And again, no one has the answer to that question. But that's really the one that we should be asking we're really looking at a 20-year period of time. And I think to Commissioner Buck's point, the first 5 to 10 years is sort of, that's where you want to think about what are the returns going to look like and what's the confidence level that we're going to see market returns that will exceed the interest rate that we get.
Thank you, Ms. Mokrajewski. Looking for any further discussion in the queue. We'll move along to Commissioner Bozievich.
Thank you, Chair. So, my concern really is about the next several years of returns in the PERS fund. We saw the modeling and we talked about some of the agencies that lost their bet because of the timing of when they invested. And if you have losses in the market in the first several years, it's hard to recover, even over the next 18. It's about that early losses. I just got my, 401k stuff. I've lost 12% since the first of the year. Half of that was in April. So just to give you an idea of where the market is. So if PERS is reporting through March, they're missing half of the losses in the market in their reporting because they're so slow on reporting. We're looking at just such unprecedented economic waters we're walking into. A global shortage of fertilizer. Never happened before in modern times. We're looking at potential famine across the globe, extreme inflation in food prices, places we've never been in our economy, and some instability that will come with that. And I'm having a hard time making a 20-year bet based on what I can look at and see as extreme instability in the economy over the next 12 months. And will probably go beyond 12 months. I'm for just pressing the pause button and letting us see what happens for a little while, partly also because we're just, we're going to be over 4.5%, and it's going to be kind of a moot point. So that's where I am right now.
Thank you, Commissioner Bozievich. Commissioner Bernie.
Thank you, Chair. Ultimately, I'm going to share a little of my analysis, but ultimately, I will vote for what staff feels is the most prudent way to move going forward. In fact, let me preface by saying, Mr. Mokrajewski, is it staff's desire to move forward no matter what on this and to close this as quickly as possible? Because interest rates are only going up.
I wouldn't say that. I think that we also feel, if we felt really strongly like we need to do this deal, now is the time, you got to make it happen, we would tell you that. I think you're hearing, we're sort of lukewarm here, and in a little nervous around the continued rising of interest rates. I think we are feeling like we sort of owe it because we have very limited tools to manage our PERS expenses. We owe it to the taxpayers to continue to evaluate this as an option and see what happens with interest rates and with the market over the next few months. And if the environment improves, let's be ready to move and to act. I mean, as Commissioner Buck said, we have done, we've issued bonds in a interest rate market that's higher than what we're in currently. So that's what, while they are rising, they're still pretty low. They're still historically low.
Okay. So home mortgages now are at a rate higher than they've been for 13 years. I don't know how that translates into bond rates like this, Ms. Samuels. I don't know if there's a direct relationship, but here's what I see. I see an economy that's moving in areas that nobody has either Commissioner Buck's silver ball or the crystal ball. I know that's what you meant. Nobody has that. We are in uncharted territory. There are now 40% more dollars printed than there were several years ago floating in this economy. We are hearing on a daily basis the amount of billions of dollars going to support Ukraine, which is truly the breadbasket of the world. The impact on food prices and supply chains, it's just a scary, scary time. There is just no certainty. Economists are always wrong when they predict anything, and that's during times of relative normality. We are not in that now. So ultimately, this is a bet. And I think, board, we have to understand that this is a bet. And we all feel burdened because it's a bet with taxpayer resources. And it's a bet that we have to make based on the knowledge that we have. And that's why I prefaced my point by saying I would go with whatever the recommendation of staff is, Robert, Steve, Ms. Samuels, because you are living this. However, we need to understand this is a bet where we don't even know what the House odds are right now. Therefore, I'm just nervous to not do anything, because it may be that we can lock interest rates before they go into double digits. And I'm nervous to do something, right? Because I don't know how far the market's going to tank right now and how long it's going to take to make that up. I think we need to be just really, really serious about this and understand we're going to make a decision without knowing all the facts. And it's the best we can do. So I'm going to go with staff recommendation, but I'm putting that out there. Those are the stakes. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Burney. Vice Chair Trieger.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation. And just to let folks know, the last time you all were in front of us with this item, I was in DC, but I did go back and watch that. So I do have the same presentation information that the board has from that meeting, even though I was absent in real time. I'm hearing a lot, first of all, about volatility, and I want to be clear, volatility in my book isn't code for it could go up. Volatility means it could go up, it could go down, it could stay flat. So it's just important to remember that. I'm hearing a lot about, we don't know what's ahead and we can't read the future. That's always true. That was true 10 years ago and 20 years ago, and it'll be true 10 and 20 years from now. It's just sort of the nature of what we do as a board. We make decisions every day and we commit taxpayer dollars to things without knowing with certainty what the future holds. It's just a matter of degree of certainty, or what are our opportunities to offset if the worst case or even second or third to worst case happens. So what I haven't heard is what happens if we don't do this, right? We want to always go to that place of, if we do this, where might it go that could be terrible? If we take no action or we delay action, what are we also risking? Because a non-decision, a pause is a decision as well and has implications. And so I am not fully, I'm not hearing that of sort of, I understand the why we would do this if it all goes the way we want it to, but what are we potentially risking without doing this?
Thanks, Commissioner Trieger. I think that's a question that we'd like to hear iterated, the answer. If we remain status quo, do we stand to lose anything, or do we just not have the opportunity to gain? So Mr. Tyndall or Ms. Samuels, please.
Well, I'll take a first pass at that, and then Robert, feel free to add. So if you do nothing, you will be in a position where basically you're invested with the bank of PERS that will continue to charge you based upon their rate of return, which, as I noted, we only have rates of return through March. And Commissioner Bozovich is exactly right. April was a terrible month, so expect those rates of return to be far lower than what I showed you. But do know that regardless of what their rate of return actually is, their model assumes that they will earn a positive 6.9%. So anytime they earn less than that, that adds to the shortfall that you are essentially financing with them. So I would expect your costs will continue to rise. And it may be that if you pursue a pension bond and it goes badly, that those rising costs will be amplified. But it's also possible that if you don't take this opportunity and interest rates continue to go up, that you will have lost the one option you have to defray some of the cost increases that are likely coming your way no matter what.
Great. Thank you for that. Much appreciated. And I'll just end my comments by echoing Commissioner Burney's sentiment that we have staff that spend every day, all day, studying and analyzing these things. And we have a finance and audit committee that looked at this, which consists of our chair and Commissioner Buck, and it was their recommendation to forward this to us. So I appreciate all that work and that diligence that brought us to this point. I am prepared to follow the recommendation.
Thank you, Vice Chair Trieger. Back to you, Commissioner Buck.
Thank you, Chair. Given the timeline that you presented, whatever we do today, if we move this forward today, is still not the final decision. But given the timeline, and we're not back in session till the day after you speak with the rating agencies, what is the mechanism for us to be A, notified, and B, if we need to make some alternate decision? Will we be pulled into a special meeting? How will that work?
Before, I don't know if that question was directed at me, but let me clarify a couple of things so that staff can then respond directly. My sense is that if you are unwilling today to increase the rate of interest that is in the resolution from 450 to something above 450, that it would not be timely to have the conversation with the rating analysts on May 23rd, because that is too much ground to make up from where we are today to where we need to be in order to feel confident that come that date in June, which I've now forgotten, but whatever date, June 13th, 14th, that you would feel confident that you would be able to get this done. So my sense is, if you want to move down the path of moving as quickly as possible, we should be talking about whether or not you're comfortable amending the form of resolution you have in front of you to something higher than 4.5.
Thank you. Thank you.
Chair, if I just might follow up on that.
Please continue.
So in all my discussions with folks, and what I mentioned earlier, for me, it's not about the interest rate currently. If we move it to 5, we move it to 5, it could still be very successful. Again, it's about what what feedback we get from those educated in the economy as to what we're going to be doing in the next, or how we're going to be doing in the next 5 to 10 years. I just want to know when we will be notified, like when is the last call? Is it our next board meeting in 2 weeks? Is that the day we either say, nope, we're not moving forward, or yes, go? Because it sounds like you'll have, you know, your points in time where you need to do a couple of things and start speaking with the rating agency, and then we need to make a decision on that date. Am I understanding this correctly?
Chair Farr, Commissioner Buck, if I may, the direction we received today from the commissioners is through the board order. So based on the percent that's in the board order, that will determine our go or no go, based on what we anticipate rates will be. So as Ms. Samuels mentioned, if it remained at 4.5%, it's it's not likely that we will move forward at all. And then we'll just return to the board and say rates were above that. We anticipate rates will above that. We're not. Ms. Samuels is suggesting at this point, the estimate, the rate could be 4.85%. If the board order was adjusted to increase it by 35 basis points, so it's 4.85, we would continue to move forward in this process through the rating agencies, because the board's given us that authority, through the rating agency review, and assuming we still think Ms. Samuel's estimate is, we still think market rates will be at 4.85, we'll continue to that bid date of mid-June. On that bid date, if rates came in at 4.86, we would not move forward because our authority was still only at 4.85. So that's the trigger. Whatever amount is listed in the board order, that is we won't go above that at all. And if for some reason we got to the bid date and it's above that amount, then we would return to, and we progress that far, then we would return to the board and say, 4.85 didn't work. Do you want to increase it? Here's additional analysis. Did you want to go to 5 or whatever percent the board puts forward today, if they choose to move forward with a percentage in the board order?
That's very clear, Mr. Tyndall. So really, our prudence lies in the number that we put into the board order today. If we were to say put 4.9%, if it goes to 4.91, then we come back and talk about it again. It's not that we're pulling the trigger on something that we don't know. There is a ceiling to what we know, and the ceiling would be at whatever is replaces in paragraph 3, the 4.5%. Given that, further discussion, I see Commissioner Bozievich. Oh, Ms. Samuels. Commissioner Bozievich, okay if Ms. Samuels responds, and then we'll go back to the queue. So,
sure,
Ms. Samuels,
but Commissioner Burney was in the queue ahead of me.
That doesn't matter to me, but actually, I'm not. But I don't mind going first.
My list has Ms. Samuels last, but I asked to ask, so I'm going in reverse order. Ms. Samuels, is there something you'd like to add before we move to the commissioner queue?
Yeah, thank you for letting me go to the head of the line. I appreciate it. I have not discussed this with staff, so I'm going a little bit out on a limb here. However, I want to observe that under Oregon law, you are now required, and as part of your resolution, you have complied with the requirement to issue a public report describing an assessment that you had a third party prepare that analyzes the probability of the success of proceeding. That analysis topped out at a borrowing rate of 4.5%. The reason the legislature adopted this requirement is because, in point of fact, pension bonds are risky. There is a fair amount of opposition to pension bonds on the street, and you may be subject to a certain amount of criticism if you proceed today to increase the interest rate without obtaining additional information. I will note the trade-off is that that additional information is not free. Echo Northwest, for the last report, I believe charged $20,000, which was spread to a fairly broad group of jurisdictions. So the cost to the county was much more nominal. I want to say between $2,500 and $3,000. And I have absolutely no knowledge that there are other jurisdictions out there who would be willing to share the cost. Although, as Robert mentioned, Lane Community College is also going down this path, although their issuance date is a month after yours. So perhaps there's hope that interest rates will go back down in that period of time. But it could well be that if you decide to go down the path of requisitioning an update, that entire cost, which may or may not be $20,000. I don't know if an update is going to be as expensive as the original report, perhaps not. But you could be on the hook for that. So I just want to observe that there is a certain amount of scrutiny over pension bonds, and that's what led to the requirement for the public report. And that might suggest that you should ask for additional information before you proceed to increase the allowable borrowing rate.
Thank you, Ms. Samuels. And I'm looking at the queue as it's stated before me, which has Commissioner Bozovich followed by Commissioner Burney, then Commissioner Buck. And I'm going to go with, as per my my electronic queue. So, Commissioner Bozovich.
Thank you, Chair. So my question is to try and clarify when we will incur the nearly $250,000 in cost for the bond rating from Standard & Poor's. That, on the timeline it showed as May 23rd. But there was is there right before that May 20th date? Is that the date if we're over 4.5%, everything stops? So if we move the board order today, we are going to incur that $250,000 no matter, we won't be able to stop that expense.
So not necessarily. And if you hear some hedging and vagueness in my response, it's because the process itself is very vague. The rating analysts have threatened this policy for the 3 decades I've been involved with ratings, and they've never followed through. So no guarantees that if you proceeded down this path that you would actually get a bill for $250,000, but you might. Here's the process that was laid out to me last week. We are required to have an interview with rating analysts, and given the size of your potential borrowing, we recommend that you get 2 ratings, not just 1. You currently have a rating with Moody's. We also recommend that in order to access the broadest possible market, you get a 2nd rating from Standard & Poor's. The process is we get together with their line staff, their analysts, and they go through their questions. We make a presentation. We ask for the AAA that you deserve. And then hopefully from Standard & Poor's, they give it to us this time. Moody's was less upbeat the last time we spoke to them. In any case, they take notes and they write up a report. And that report comes with a recommendation to a committee. It is when they go to committee that the bill is triggered. So on our current schedule, that is probably the end of that week or the beginning of the following week. Which means that we can tell the analysts, don't go to committee without checking back with us as to whether or not we want you to proceed. But there will come a point where we are going to have to decide whether to go or not to go, whether that's May 23rd, we can check in and see what the market is doing and then have the conversation. And then right before they go to committee, they can call us and we can check the market again and see whether or not we're comfortable going forward. My general comfort is I like to be below the maximum rate on the day I tell them to go to committee, but does that protect you in all cases? No, because it could be by the time you get into the market that you've gotten the rating, you've incurred the bill, and the market isn't there. So, long answer to your brief question of the drop dead date is the day they go to committee, which is likely May 27th or the following week.
So that answers my question that we'll have a board meeting prior to that drop dead date when we're going to incur costs. So that's what I was trying to get to. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Bozovich. Commissioner Burney.
So to me, that did not answer the question. The answer to the question was maybe yes, maybe no. The answer, here's what I've heard so far also. We need to approve now changing the border to 4.85. And I've heard no, don't do that because there might be additional questions and you will be under scrutiny. I don't know about the rest of this board, but this is reminding me of the Harry Belafonte lyrics in one of his songs. It was clear as mud and it covered the ground. That is why I have said, and I will restate, there's so much we don't know. I want assurances if we move forward that either what the hell am I voting on? Am I voting on increasing the rate to 4.85 max or not? Now, I want to know for damn sure that I'm not committing the county with a vote to an expense of up to $250,000 before our next board meeting or not. I need to know that to make a vote. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Commissioner Burney. Commissioner Buck.
My concern is the economic analysis that only went up to 4.5%. And clearly it seems like that is not the percentage that we'll be going for. And it's not, again, for me, it's not the rate itself that concerns me. It is the fact that if we don't have the updated economic analysis for up to 4.85 or up to 5%, that we are operating and not giving the full information to the public that they need in advance. So if we proceeded today, I would want to make sure that we can update that report for the public prior to making a decision. And I don't know how long that will take. So my question is, how long does it take to do that? And is there some, I mean, I know this aligns with our budget for next year, and that's what we're trying to solidify. But even if we were a couple weeks after our target deadline, is that so bad? So that we can get this economic analysis in time for the public and then be able to move forward with a more confident position.
Good questions, Commissioner Buck. And I'm going to ask for a very quick response to that. We need to precipitate today's board decision fairly soon. So in response to Commissioner Buck, if we have to wait 2 more weeks beyond the target date, does that hurt? Is that so bad? Did I rephrase that okay, Commissioner Buck?
I would ask Ms. Samuels, are you aware of the timeline for if a single employer asked for the report, how long Eco Northwest may take on that?
I am not. I can certainly make a phone call as soon as we're done here. In the past, I have seen them do updates reasonably quickly, like in a couple of weeks. But that depends on circumstances that I'm not privy to.
So Chair Farr, as mentioned at the beginning of the introduction, one of the options was for staff to obtain the additional analysis required and then come back to the board at that time as well. And it will our timeline will move incrementally, but we do have that option of postponing this board order today and coming back with additional analysis as well.
Thank you, Mr. Tyndall. Now, the 2 weeks that we're talking about on that, and Ms. Samuels coincidentally coincides with a relatively fast turnaround from Eco Northwest. That does coincide with our next board meeting. So that being said, board, we have an option right now, it would seem, and correct me if I'm wrong, that we can direct staff to obtain an updated analysis from Eco Northwest in order for us to reconsider this at the May 24th board meeting. However, I will say this, and Ms. Jones will be the first to support me, that is a very crowded meeting. So does that, Mr. Tyndall, is that an accurate statement right there?
Yes, Chair, thank you.
And Ms. Jones has just reminded me that really there is no time in that meeting. So we would probably be looking at the May 25th, which is the Wednesday of that week, which we don't like. But
Chair Farr, this is Anna. I'm just going to jump in, and I am getting text messages about this. I'm looking at the possibility of April 25th, maybe, but I believe we already have a meeting then as well. So give me 1 second and I'll verify that just so we can close this out.
May 25th, yeah.
May 25th.
And
yeah, as of right now, I have not rolled items to the 25th. There's a possibility. So if the board directs, we could have this item back on May 25th for a Wednesday morning item as well. Thanks.
Chair Farr, I would just add that, again, as a reminder, it is dependent upon the turnaround time from Eco Northwest, so it could take longer than 2 weeks, and so we might not be ready at any rate for that date as well. But we could return as soon as feasibly possible.
But next meeting after the 25th is 2 weeks subsequent to that, because we move into Memorial Day weekend. So it's either on the 25th or on the, what is it, the something of June, the 4th of June. Excuse me, not the 4th of June, the
7th, Chair.
The 7th of June, thank you. So then to the board, this is an option that we have, and you have your hand raised, Commissioner Buck. Let me state this, see if it coincides with maybe what you're going to say, is that we ask staff or direct staff to request an update post haste from Eco Northwest on the economic analysis. And at that point, we bring it back on May 25th, if possible, if not on June 7th or 8th. Does that sound reasonable, Mr. Tyndall? Okay, Commissioner Buck.
Just going to add that, given the large amount of dollars that we're talking about here, we can always have a special session as soon as we get the feedback. If the chair so decides, that's your discretion, Chair. And in addition, I would want to make sure that if we're going back for the economic analysis, which I would prefer to have before making this final decision, that we not just go up to give us an economic analysis at 4.85, because the interest rate could change. So I would ask to go to 5 or 5.25 or 5.5, somewhere in there, so that we give ourselves a range to still have an appropriate amount of information returned.
Which seems as that would be a cushion for the board to operate with at that point in time, Mr. Tyndall. Is that good analysis? Very good. Then, anything further for today's discussion other than the directions to the staff? So then, that being said, Mr. Mokrycki, I think unless I see some dissent, that we're asking you to return to Echo Northwest and ask for a reanalysis up to, Commissioner Book, you said 5.5%. We could say 5.25%, or Mr. Tyndall, does it make any difference what it is?
I just give it to Robert and see.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll ask them for a range of options as they typically do.
Okay. So if that were the instructions that we give you, Mr. Tyndall, Ms. Mokrycki, and Ms. Samuels, is that clear enough? Very good. Then we need no action on the board order for today. Commissioner Burney.
I apologize, but the interest rate is so critical here. Ms. Samuels, do you agree that the interest rate, as Commissioner Buck stated, is not critical, or do you agree that that really significantly impacts what our future might look like here? And I don't know, I'm just asking for clarification.
So I think you're both right. How's that for diplomacy? It is a two-headed coin where the interest rate is important, but equally, perhaps even more important, is the rate of return on the investment that you are going to make.
Understood, because we can't do a long-winded thing. I'm good with that. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Commissioner Burney. I wish I had a job where I could just say, you're both right, you're all right, but you might all be wrong too. So, that being said, Mr. Mokrycki, do you have, actually, I'll go back to the queue. Commissioner Bozovich, please.
Yeah, just real quick, the prior analysis was done at 2.5%, 3.5%, and 4.5%. So I think if we can ask, Echo Northwest maybe to do 5%, 5.5%, that we'll be able to interpolate 4.85, risk between those numbers, et cetera. But I think that kind of, they can do more than one interest rate in an analysis. And I think, once we start pushing past 5.5, we're getting close enough to the 6.9 assumed rate that gets really tough. But yeah, so that's just my thought is, and I think we can leave that up to Robert and Carol to deter and the administrator determine which interest rates they ought to analyze. But I think they can do a couple for us.
That's good. But if 5 to 5.5 were the range, 4.85 would be an extrapolation, not an interpolation, but that's just semantics. Very good. So, Mr. Mokrycki, Mr. Tyndall, do you have good instructions based upon that that set that we've just given you?
In the previous report, but
yes.
Yes. Very good. Then no further action is needed today. This has been a good discussion. Ms. Samuels, thank you very much. And I teasingly said, I wish I had your job. I would not receive, well, anyway, I don't want your job. Thank you very much.
Right.
Then to the board, thank you very much for this discussion. No action needed on this for this date. We'll look forward to it coming back, hopefully on the 25th of May, but potentially 2 weeks after that. Thank you, Ms. Samuels. Mr. Tyndall, thank you very much. Then we'll move down our agenda. We only have one more item on our actual agenda, which is an executive session. But prior to going to that, we'll move to, we may come out for other business after executive session, but let's go to Commissioner's business. Actually, Mr. Mokrycki, I'm skipping you again. Do you have any announcements?
Briefly, Chair, I'll just share that a quick election update number 2. Voter turnout through yesterday, Monday, May 9th, it was 26,204 ballots received, or 9.66%. Voter turnout compared to the last similar election, the 2018 primary, shows returns coming in around 11% slower. This may be a result of the postmark accepting law change. We do encourage voters to return their ballots to one of our 21 official drop site locations. That's always what I do. You certainly can put it in the mail and postage is paid for, but there's more of a lag time when you put it in the mail. If you put it in one of our 21 drop site locations, we do those pickups daily. So our in the list of drop sites is included with the voter packet. So when you receive that, there is a list of where those drop sites are located. Our daily call volume remains high, and we ask that voters be patient if they do not receive an immediate response. Election information, including the drop site location map, daily voter turnout statistics, and a replacement ballot order form can all be found on our webpage at lanecounty.org/elections. So that's your elections update. We'll do one more update next week for you. The other thing I wanted to I presume that the board, as we received public comment this morning regarding the F2 zone properties, replacement dwellings, and I just wanted to add some context and share some information and create some clarity, hopefully a little bit of clarity. There's been a lot of, I should say, a fair amount of misinformation or misunderstanding on some of these issues that in some of which has been propagated in the community. So I wanted to just make it very clear that there has been no change in decision related to replacement dwellings and the policy directive. Anyone who's come in, I think we've had 3 or 4 individuals, a handful, maybe 4 or 5 individuals that have come in, and no permit request has been denied. The concern here again is that there was a decision made and a policy directive to deny replacement rights for destroyed dwelling. That is not true. There's been some information put out that says that Lane County has said that if your property has been destroyed by a fire or a landslide or damaged by a falling tree, that you've been told that you will not be able to build a replacement dwelling. That is not true. We have not told anyone that they cannot replace their dwelling. We have not denied any permits, and it is our position, I've discussed this with staff, that we will review those permits and that we will lean into what our past decision, our past interpretation of the state law has consistently been. What has been told to the handful of folks that have inquired about this is that we are aware of a different interpretation of the state law. In fact, this was brought to DLCD's attention regarding the Labor Day 2020 fires, and DLCD subsequently revised the OAR language to protect the rights of Labor Day fire survivors to rebuild. So DLCD recognized that there was a need to adjust that OAR language for Labor Day fire survivors. So what has been shared with folks who have inquired is that we are aware that there's some ambiguity with the law, and there's the potential of an appeal by Land Watch. And we've shared that with folks because we feel that we have an obligation to share with them something that we are aware of. If we didn't share that information and then there was an appeal, and applicants knew that we were aware of the information and we didn't share it at the time that they submitted their application, that obviously would lead to frustrations by applicants and by others. So that is what is being shared. We also have directed staff to follow up with any residents that we have had conversations with along these lines and clarify them that they're free to file for replacement dwelling application and that we will review it. And that we are leaning into the past practice, that we're placing significance on the decades of past practice of approving replacement dwelling applications. But we cannot guarantee that an approval by the county will not be appealed, okay? So I just want to be crystal clear. There's been information that we've denied applications for replacement dwellings. False, absolutely false. There's been information saying that we have told people that they would not receive, that we would not approve it. False. That has not been stated. We have shared with folks, so if there's been a misunderstanding or misinterpretation of that language, I think it is clear there's been some manipulation of that language that has been put out, unfortunately, to folks that has stoked the flames of that misunderstanding and that misinformation. I think that's very unfortunate. And so my goal here this morning is just to share with you the facts around what has been communicated and what has been done to date and what we have communicated with staff on how to handle those going forward. It's very clear that we need a legislative fix. There's no question about that there's a legislative fix that is needed. I think our legislative delegation is aware of that need for adjusting that language, but there has been no new interpretation by county staff and no denial of any permits that have been submitted. So I'll stop there. I imagine the board is going to have some questions. I believe we will have land management and county council staff available to answer questions on that as well.
Thank you, Mr. Mokrahasky. So before we move on to Commissioner's business, we'll open a queue for response to Mr. Mokrahasky. Commissioner Bernie.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Steve. I think you've now done what there is the problem has been created by this lack of clarity on this new state legislation. I have a letter that I forwarded to Keir and Steve from Senator Beyer that literally is identifying one, he thinks the correct interpretation needs to be consistent with all past treatment of grandfathered non-conforming uses, number one. And number two, he's calling for our delegation to initiate clarifying legislation at the next biennium so this becomes the non-issue that it should be. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Bernie. Further response, Mr. Mokrahasky? I see none at this point in time. Thank you, Mr. Mokrahasky. Then we will move along to Commissioner's business. And first we have 8A, which is announcements, and we'll put /announcements/other business. So Commissioner Bozovich.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I was having trouble getting my hand up fast enough on the last discussion. It's interesting that Senator Beyer wants us to clarify that we're going to continue to use the previous interpretation and that staff's leaning that direction. It's exactly what I asked the board to provide direction on 2 weeks ago and was basically shot down, was basically to continue our interpretation as allowing that and providing the same rights to conforming uses that non-conforming uses are being given, because there's a constitutional issue around that. So I'm happy to hear that that's the interpretation staff's planning on taking. I might disagree somewhat with some of the email interchange and over-the-counter discussions with applicants and potential applicants, whether or not they were being told there was potential for denial or not. But that's how people interpret language somewhat. So I'll just leave it at that. That still doesn't resolve the NIMKIS issue and big game habitat. And we've been provided a path forward with that, very similar to something I recommended last time, except for even less burdensome for staff, in that instead of putting the clarification actually into our code, the clarification is purely in a board interpretation of what we were trying to resolve when the state was going through our process of approving our rural comprehensive plan and gave us the choice between density and clustering. And we made a conscious decision back in the 80s to go to clustering. And we just need to reaffirm that interpretation as our local preference on ambiguous language, which will help any future appeals of that issue be resolved in the favor of the clustering issue, which is what we do in the template approvals. As we move into commissioner's business, I'll ask for support from the board to ask staff to look at that recommendation that came from the home builders and see if we could move forward with that process. Because if for some reason we do get appealed, say Mr. Reese is going to be applying to replace his home. If he does get appealed and has to go back to applying from scratch, then the NIMKIS decision is what probably keeps a lot of people from being able to rebuild. So we have to deal with that. It's two separate things we have to deal with. You know, replacement after disaster and the big game habitat ambiguity in policy 11 of our goal 5. And we have a path forward for that. So hopefully we will move forward. You know, I'll get concurrence from the board to move forward with that when we get to agenda team requests.
Thank you, Commissioner Bozovich. We are now on 8A, which is announcements, and we're blurred the line a little bit because you did not have a chance to respond to Mr. Murkowski. So we are on 8A, which will be followed by future board assignment requests. Vice Chair Trieger.
Thank you, Chair. This is not exactly an announcement or an assignment request, but this is Commissioner business. We all received notice from Association of Oregon Counties that per House Bill 4098, there's an opportunity to forward the name of a commissioner to be considered for governor appointment to the task force working on allocation of the opioid settlement funds. It's a 17-member body, and there are 8 counties named. Well, there's a total of 9, 10, 11, but 8 of a certain size range, Lane being one. This 17-member body will also, in addition to having commissioner representatives, will have representatives from law enforcement, from the treatment community, and more. It's all spelled out in the House bill, but this is the Opioid Settlement Prevention, Treatment, and Recovery Fund task force that will talk about allocation of the state portion of the settlement dollars. And the deadline for this body to send a name to the Association of Oregon Counties from Lane for consideration by the governor for appointment is is before our next board meeting. So today is the day. And so I think the best way to handle this is if we can get head nods. I would be willing and interested to be considered as the name that we put forward from this board to represent Lane County, should a Lane County commissioner be one of the commissioner's seats on the board. So there's several layers for this to go through. So I am looking for head nods that we submit my name to the Association of Oregon Counties for that potential for appointment.
Looks like you have unanimous approval on that. Actually, Commissioner Burney, I didn't see anything from you, but okay, good. I think let's go with that.
Great, thank you very much.
Very good.
Appreciate it.
Then I'll go back to the queue for this particular item, which is still announcement / business. I see nobody, so we'll go back to something that I promised, and that is that we would talk about the 2 appointees from the county, from the Board of Commissioners to the ARPA. The ARPA, what are we calling it, Robert? The
Scoring Committee Chair for.
Thank you. So 2 commissioners, and the suggestion was that we have 1 Metro and 1 Rural Commissioner. Commissioner Trieger has kind of surfaced as the Metro Commissioner. So the discussion where we left off, which can still be changed, a Rural Commissioner. Anybody? Let me go to the queue, and I apologize. Commissioner Bozovich.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to, I was going to defer to Commissioner Buck. I know she's very interested in being involved in this grant process, particularly seeing that there is some fire recovery issues that may be able to be helped with the grants. And I was going to defer to her. I was a little taken aback when my name came up earlier. So I'm glad you deferred it because it gave me the opportunity to say thank you, but no thank you. I think Commissioner Buck's got a very high interest in serving on this committee.
I used 2 criteria. One was alphabetic. The second was length of time on the board. Both came out you. So, so I think without further ado, then Commissioner Burney, go ahead.
Oh, no biggie. All I was going to say was that's the reason I asked to defer it. I didn't know that Commissioner Bozovich was going to nominate her, but I was going to suggest her as well. So we're good, at least as long as Commissioner Buck is good.
I still see a face, so that's a good thing.
I'm fine with that. You know, either one would have been fine for me.
Very good. Then the 2 commissioners, Mr. Tyndall, Ms. Dreyer will be Vice Chair Trieger and Commissioner Buck.
Thank you, commissioners.
Excellent. Then let us, I'm going to go back to the queue. Nothing else in the queue. Then I'm going to go back to our agenda. Pardon me a second. We'll move to future board assignments, item 8B. And apologies to everybody, we're coming up on the noon hour. We do have a time-sensitive executive session that we will conduct subsequent to this particular item. So future board assignment requests. Commissioner Bozievich.
Thank you. I think this is the appropriate time to ask for 3 head nods to have staff review the proposal from the home builders, see if it's a viable alternative to resolve the big game habitat issues that are preventing development of housing on F2 lands that traditionally were allowed to have housing. So if I can get 3 head nods to have staff spend some time analyzing that and reporting back to the board, I'd appreciate it.
If I may ask, Commissioner Bozievich, is this at all coincident with the with Commissioner Bernie's suggestion that we had an email from Senators Brzezinski and Beyer?
I believe that was relative to the fire / destroyed house replacement. This is relative to the Nimkish and King decisions around density on F2 lands. And what you heard some public testimony this morning around people that had purchased property with, at that time, understanding they had a right to build a dwelling. And now suddenly, because of an appeal through the Land Use Board of Appeals, they're now being told they don't have a right to develop their property. And this is a way of adding a local interpretation, which LUBA tends to defer to a local interpretation of an ambiguous piece of code. Ambiguous. So, ambiguous. Yeah, I'm having. Sorry, it's getting close to noon. I need food, and I think this would help resolve that and provide a path for folks to build that housing and hang on to their investments they've made. And you know, in one case, it sounds like somebody that made an investment back in the 40s. So that's all. I'm just hoping we can get 3 head nods to have staff spend that time. It's a much more streamlined process than amending code.
So it's to take a look at the email that was forwarded by Mr. Barrell and have staff analyze that and bring back a recommendation to the board. You have my approval. Yeah, get my head nod on that. Do we have a third?
Yeah, but I just want,
Commissioner.
You have my head nod on that, understanding that that doesn't commit us to a direction. It's just asking staff to look into that and to make a recommendation. I also want to say, Commissioner, that you were not shot down as it related to fire placement and replacement of F2 homes. In fact, we went through it without going through any big political formality, and I think this is going to be handled very expeditiously on that item. So approve your request. Wanted to make that statement about the other item. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Buck.
Thank you, Chair. If this is a report back, I'm fine with that. I think right now there is so much misinformation flying around that it behooves us to have our land management folks return. I haven't had a chance to review that email that came in, but I do respect the home builders, and I know that everybody's trying to find ways to solve this particular issue. So I'm okay with the report back, but I do still feel like our legislative committee here should continue their efforts as well.
Thank you, Commissioner Buck. I would presume that to be the case. Ms. Mokrasky, I'll look at you. Is that a clear instruction from you, for you?
Yes, I believe so. I'll just give the review now, and that is from Commissioner Bozievich to have staff review the request from the home builders related to the Nimkish issue and big game habitat and report back to the board with options and recommendations.
Very good summary, because that concluded future board assignment requests and a review of assignments. I see no more assignment requests and no more review of assignments. So we will, with my apologies, this will take more than 5 minutes. We will be moving into executive session. So I'll read us into executive session. At the tap of my gavel, at the sound of my gavel, we will recess the regular meeting of the Board of County Commissioners and reconvene at noon in executive session. The Board of Commissioners will meet in executive session to conduct deliberations with persons designated by the governing body to carry on labor negotiations. This executive session is held pursuant to ORS 192.6602D, which allows the Board of Commissioners to meet in executive session for the purposes listed. Representatives of the news media and designated staff shall be allowed to attend the executive session. All other members of the audience are asked to leave the room. Strike media on that last. All other members of the audience are asked to leave the room. Representatives of the news media are specifically directed not to report on any of the deliberations during the executive session, except to state the general subject of the session as previously announced. No decision may be made in executive session. We reserve the right to come back into public session should the need arise. If the need does not arise, Board, we will return with the balance of the Budget Committee at 2 o'clock for a Budget Committee meeting. We are recessed.